Welcome to the Drowsy Historian, the only place where you'll fall asleep smarter than you woke up. Tonight, we're marching straight into the mud-caked, blood-soaked boots of a medieval soldier in the Holy Roman Empire. No, not the glamorous knight with a flowing cape and a family crest carved in gold. We're talking about you, the nameless, underfed, overtaxed foot soldier who exists only in forgotten battle ledgers and plague-riddled mass graves. You didn't sign up for glory, you were dragged in, and once you wore that imperial eagle stitched crooked on a tattered banner, you became one more cog in the Empire's clanking, inefficient war machine. So grab your rusted spear, your bread crust, soaked in rat piss, and let's march through what might just be the most miserable military experience medieval Europe had to offer. You'll meet a few unlucky souls on the way, but mostly, you'll meet reality. Chapter 1, drafted by blood and coin. Let's not pretend you had a choice. In the Holy Roman Empire, if you were a peasant, a poor townsman, or just unlucky enough to live in a territory where some duke owed another duke a favor, military service wasn't something you signed up for, it was something you were selected for. That's what they called it when they marched into your village with a few armed men, posted a badly scratched edict on the church door, and told the local priest to read out the names. Yours was one of them. You weren't born to fight. You were born to thresh wheat, and maybe grow old enough to inherit a pig. But the emperor, who you'll never see in your life by the way, decided war was brewing in Italy, or Bohemia, or maybe against the French, or perhaps the Pope's cousin this time. The empire was never quite sure who it was fighting, but it always knew where to get its soldiers. Your doorstep. Meet Dieter, a barrel maker's son from a nameless hamlet somewhere near Würzburg. He's 19, has never been farther than the village fair, and until this morning the closest he'd come to combat was getting headbutted by a drunk uncle at Pentecost. He doesn't even own shoes, but thanks to the empire's concept of levy by land, basically nobles promise men, then shake peasants until some fall out, Dieter is now a soldier, sort of. He's herded with 30 others to the market square, given a split tunic dyed half red half mud, and handed what's generously called a spear. It's just a fire-hardened stick with a rusted iron point barely clinging to its shaft. Some of the men brought their own tools from home, wood-cutting axes, hammers, even a few pitchforks. Weapons? Technically yes, legal under imperial muster, debatable, but no one's checking. Here's the punchline. Dieter's not paid, at least not yet. The local knight says they'll receive coin after the campaign, assuming they survive. It's a common arrangement. The empire, lacking a standing army, relied on promised compensation, which is historians speak for we'll pay you when we feel like it, if we remember. More often than not, you were rewarded in loot, assuming you got to the battlefield before a noble's entourage cleaned it out. Some unlucky men were sort of paid, given clipped bracteates, the wafer-thin silver coins of the day. They bent when sneezed on and lost value every time they were melted and re-stamped by a new duke claiming a reform. One soldier later claimed he received 13 coins that collectively weighed less than his fingernail. And let's not forget what was waiting beyond the village borders. Training? Nope. Strategy? Try again. You were marched into a muddy field once or twice to drill, which involved forming lines, waving your stick like a scared goose, and praying you didn't hit your neighbor in the eye. After 3 days they declared you ready for war. This, my friend, is where the myth of chivalric warfare dies screaming. Behind the poetic tapestries and stained glass depictions of brave knights riding under God's light, the real army of the Holy Roman Empire looked like a half-starved crowd of conscripted farmers led by 6 different nobles who couldn't agree on the direction of the sun. And remember, this was an empire in name only. In reality, it was a political disaster, made of hundreds of squabbling territories stitched together by paper, popes, and paranoia. The emperor rarely issued direct orders. He simply requested support. That meant each prince, archbishop, margrave or landgrave did their own recruiting, often bribing or threatening their subjects, promising plunder and eternal salvation, which frankly were equally vague. Some towns even drew names by lottery. One unlucky man from Ulm reportedly tried to pay a neighbor to take his place using a sack of onions. It worked. The onions survived. The neighbor did not. And let's talk about gear. Dieter's armor is a padded gambeson handed down from 3 cousins, stitched together with leather cords and dried animal fat. His helmet is an upside-down cooking pot with eye slits carved into it. It doesn't fit, and when it rains, it fills with water. On the plus side, it doubles as a soup bowl. He's joined by another reluctant soldier, Lucas, an ex-monk who got thrown out of his monastery for gambling with the altar boy's bread. Lucas has a mouth like a Roman satirist and a knife he stole from a traveling peddler. He's smarter than he looks, and in Dieter's eyes practically a warlord. Together, they start the long march, 30 miles to some borderland fortress, where they've been told a rebellion is brewing. Who's rebelling? Against whom? No one's sure, but apparently it's important enough to die for. This is the point in every Hollywood epic where swelling music plays, and banners rise in the wind. In the Holy Roman Empire, the only thing rising was the smell, unwashed bodies, spoiled meat, and the wet, squelching scent of medieval boots that had stepped in too much pig waste. As Dieter walks with blisters growing in places he didn't know existed, he wonders what his service will look like. Glory? No. A warm meal? Maybe. A sword? Highly unlikely. What he does get is a world of confusion, filth, betrayal, and an introduction to the kind of suffering that never makes it into heroic songs. But don't worry, this is just day one. By the second day of marching, the romance of war has already rotted from Dieter's mind, like an overripe pear in summer heat. His calves ache, his back burns, and his left foot has begun producing a strange, wet sound with every step. Blisters, possibly. Disease, also possible. He wouldn't know, because medical care in the army is what you'd call spiritual, as in pray harder and die slower. They've joined a ragtag force outside Nördlingen, about 150 men standing in formation, so crooked it looks like a drunk bishop tried to draw a straight line. Every man wears a slightly different outfit. Some have bits of old chainmail. Others wear butcher's aprons. One even has a bucket for a helmet. No irony there. It's literally a bucket. Their commanding officer is a minor noble named Count Eberhard von Schellen, a man whose only military credential seems to be owning a horse and shouting in Latin. Before battle, Count Eberhard gives a speech. You might expect courage, inspiration, or at least a warning. What you get is this: Deus Vult, and now march. That's it. God wills it. What God wants with this pile of confused peasants, broken gear and poor sanitation is anyone's guess. Dieter assumes God's will must include diarrhea, because Lucas has been clutching his stomach and sweating for the last 3 miles. The salted pork they ate was green. They ate it anyway. The destination is a crumbling fortress held by rebellious elements. That could mean heretics, rival nobles, or villagers who refuse to pay an extra tax to fund Eberhard's wine cellar. Clarity isn't the Empire's strong suit. In fact, it's barely even a suggestion. Orders are given by torchlight on parchment none of the soldiers can read. One page literally blew away in the wind, and they just shrugged and kept marching. When they reach the outer field, they are told to dig. Why? Because siege warfare isn't glamorous. It's digging. Digging trenches, latrines and holes to sleep in. Dieter has never used a shovel in frozen ground before. Turns out it's like trying to carve cheese from a stone. His hands bleed after an hour. There's no gloves. There's no tent. There's just the bitter realization that the army is not a place of honor. It's a place where you become mud, and the mud is everywhere. Caked in your clothes, your teeth, your soul. It seeps through leather boots, stiff wool, even the pores of your skin. It's not poetic, it's vile. The kind of mud that smells like it knows things. Like it remembers every war, every corpse, every spilled chamber pot. Because in medieval siege camps, sanitation is a rumor. There are trenches for waste, but nobody uses them. Men just relieve themselves behind carts or wherever their knees give out. Eberhard's siege plan is simple: starve them out. So for 2 weeks, the soldiers sit in slush and cold, occasionally hurling insults or rocks over the wall. One man throws a dead rabbit, another tries to launch a loaf of spoiled bread using a makeshift catapult. It breaks immediately. Morale is not what you'd call high. And in the silence between skirmishes, Dieter begins to hear the whispers, not spiritual ones, real ones, about deserters, men who sneak off at night, hoping to return home and claim they were lost in the chaos. But desertion isn't free, it's punished by hanging, or worse, binding. That's where they tie you to a tree in winter and let frost do the sentencing. Dieter decides he'll wait, for now. Lucas somehow still jokes. You know, he mutters between coughs. The monastery wasn't so bad, at least the rats there had the decency to die quietly. He lifts his gambison and shows a new bite mark near his ribs. The rats here are aggressive, bold even. One tried to take a soldier's boot last night while he slept. Successfully. Food is running out. Not that it was ever abundant. They've boiled the same bones 3 times. They chew on leather scraps. One soldier was caught licking the grease off a rusty helmet. They found a bag of oats, moldy. They ate it. Later, 6 men vomited simultaneously. The stench hung over the camp like a punishment from heaven. Then there's the issue of uniforms, or lack thereof. No empire-wide standard exists, so some men look like soldiers, others like bakers, a few like outlaws. This confusion becomes fatal during a scouting skirmish. A group of Imperial recruits sees a band of men wearing different colors and attacks. Turns out they were allies from another county. One survived, missing an ear. Next time carry a banner, he mutters. Or maybe just don't exist. The hierarchy of command is equally disastrous. Count Eberhard reports to Duke Albrecht, who reports to the Archbishop of Mainz, who reports to the Emperor, who reports to no one except maybe the Pope, depending on the year and whose cousin was involved in a scandal at the latest council. This tangled mess of politics ensures that even if you win a battle, you might lose the war simply because the guy next to you thinks you're fighting for the wrong branch of the same collapsing tree. Through it all, Dieter learns the unofficial soldier's motto: if the food doesn't kill you, the cold will. If not the cold, the nobles. And if not them, well, there's always the rat. One night, while sleeping under a borrowed tarp made from stitched-together cloaks, he looks up at the cloudy sky and wonders aloud, "How did I get here?" Lucas answers from nearby, voice barely audible, "Because someone richer needed someone poorer to bleed." And that's the real answer, not just for Dieter, for every conscript, levy, mercenary, and unlucky soul pressed into the Empire's eternal conflicts. You don't serve for glory, you serve because someone else had the coin, the rank, or the priest to say you had to. Tomorrow they storm the gates, with ladders that splinter and hopes that don't last the night. But that, dear sleeper, is a horror for the next chapter. Chapter 2. Rusted chainmail and rotten boots. Let's talk about your equipment, or rather your lack of it. You'd think that if the Holy Roman Empire wanted you to fight and die for it, it would at least give you something better than a glorified potato sack and a pointed stick. But here's a brutal little truth. Military provisioning in the Empire was about as organized as a barnyard wrestling match. Your gear depended entirely on who drafted you, how rich they were, and whether their quartermaster was sober when he packed the carts. For Dieter and the rest of Count Eberhard's conscripts, the results were predictably awful. His armor consists of a gambeson, essentially a thick quilt soaked in lard and sweat, allegedly meant to cushion blows but mostly useful for trapping lice. Over that, he's been issued a rusted mail shirt, one size too small, which bites into his armpits every time he lifts his arm. The rings are corroded, brittle and stitched to a mouldy leather vest for support. One sharp jab from a halberd, and it'll split open like a wet pastry. And the helmet? Oh, the helmet. It's conical, dented, and smells faintly of onions. There's a suspicious crack along the back, which Lucas claims was made by the previous owner falling off a horse and landing headfirst into a wine barrel. He's probably joking, probably. Boots, if you can even call them that, are the true torment. They're heavy leather, ankle high, and about as waterproof as a sponge. Dieter's pair leaks so badly he's taken to stuffing straw inside them, which only accelerates the rot. After a few days of marching through muddy fields and stagnant ditches, his toes are blistered, swollen, and turning a slightly unnatural shade of grey. The other soldiers aren't much better off. One wears mismatched shoes, another tied rags around his feet like some cursed monk from a heretical cult. One man simply walks barefoot, convinced the saints will protect him. So far they haven't. Let's not forget the belt if you have one. It's not for style. It's to hold your sword if you're lucky enough to be issued one. Most aren't. Dieter, like many, was handed a short sword that might have seen action in the previous century. It rattles in its scabbard. The hilt is wrapped in old cloth, and the blade's edge is so dull it might be safer for the enemy if you actually stab them. And you'll need to sharpen it yourself using a whetstone that, surprise, was not issued to you. Lucas traded a smoked fish to a Bohemian cook for one. He now moonlights as the camp's only blade sharpener, charging a crust of bread or a few boiled beans per session. Supply and demand, he says with a crooked smile. Welcome to the medieval military-industrial complex. The Empire, for all its prestige, never managed to standardize its armies. There was no central arsenal, no imperial regulation for armor or weapons. Instead, each lord outfitted his levies with whatever he could afford or, more often, whatever he could loot from the last campaign. If you were lucky, you got something recently stolen from a dead mercenary. If you were unlucky, it came from a plague corpse. This chaotic mess leads to some interesting fashion choices. One unit of Saxon troops shows up in bright yellow tunics with rabbit fur collars. They look less like warriors and more like drunken jesters. Another unit arrives in polished black armor and refuses to share latrines with the rest. Apparently they're from a more refined principality. Everyone hates them immediately, but aesthetics are the least of your problems when your shoulder strap breaks mid-battle and your breastplate slides down to expose your gut, or when your sword handle, warped by moisture, spins in your hand like a greased eel, or when your helmet's visor jams shut mid-charge, leaving you stumbling blind into a wall. Yes, all of these things have happened. Yes, recently. Dieter tries to fix his equipment between marches. Using a fishbone, he stitches part of his gambeson closed. He replaces his belt buckle with a bent spoon. He uses wax from a stolen church candle to try and waterproof his boots. The results? Mixed. Mostly terrible. And remember, there's no resupply. No tidy wagon train following behind with fresh gear. If you lose your shield, that's it. One soldier who dropped his on a river crossing had to use a large wooden bowl for protection. It shattered instantly upon impact with a rock. Even worse is what happens after battle. You'd think you'd be allowed to repair your gear. No, you're expected to show up to the next skirmish with whatever you can scrounge. A broken spear, try tying the head to a stick with horsehair. Torn armor, good luck finding thread. And don't ask the blacksmith. He's already passed out drunk, and anyway, he's only there to shoe horses. But the real kicker, all this suffering for armor that doesn't even work. Most wounds still penetrate. Arrows slip through gaps in the mail. Blades punch through weak spots. One man, Rudolph, an older soldier with a nose like a crumpled parchment, gets stabbed through his leather jerkin and dies in minutes. The attacker's blade? A sharpened kitchen knife. There is no nobility in this suffering. No glory in this. Your protection is a lie. A barely functional shell meant to convince you that your life matters to those in power. It doesn't. You're meat in metal, waiting to be discarded. And yet they still expect you to fight, to charge into chaos, to block trained mercenaries with your moldy shield, to kill or be killed, all while your pants are falling apart and your helmet whistles in the wind like a cracked flute. Lucas says it best. They dress us like fools, arm us like beggars, and then wonder why we die like animals. There's no punchline to that, just cold truth. The Holy Roman Empire, fragmented, overstretched, absurdly bureaucratic, may call itself holy, but its soldiers, they were disposable, rusted chainmail, rotten boots, and lives worth less than the arrowheads that end them. It only takes a few weeks in the field for the armor to become more of a liability than a lifeline. Dieter now walks with a slight limp, caused not by a battle wound, but from the uneven, hardened seams of his leather boots, cutting into his ankles. His shoulders are perpetually sore from the ill-fitted chainmail, and the once padded gambeson has absorbed so much sweat and rain, it now weighs as much as a newborn calf. And don't even ask about hygiene. Imagine wearing the same scratchy, lice-infested fabric for months on end. No bath, no change of clothes, just layer upon layer of human stench, trapped under rusted rings and moldy wool. Some soldiers develop rashes so severe they bleed through their shirts. Others scratch until they draw blood. The camp's solution: walk it off, or better yet, rub garlic on it if you can find garlic. Most end up chewing it raw, hoping it'll ward off infection or at least mask the smell of rotting teeth. The situation becomes particularly grim after rain. Water pools in the recesses of armor, soaking socks, festering in gloves, and turning every exposed surface into a breeding ground for blisters. Leather contracts, metal corrodes, and clothing never dries. The scent alone could chase away a Mongol scout. One afternoon, as the army prepares to break camp and move toward a rumored rebel outpost, Dieter discovers that his mail shirt has fused to his gambeson. Literally, weeks of moisture and body heat have melted the two fabrics together in a sticky, mildew-slick bond. Lucas offers to pry it apart with a knife, but halfway through the process, they both agree to stop when it starts pulling off patches of skin. In theory, each unit has an armorer. In practice, the one assigned to Eberhardt's force is a half-blind Sith, with a gambling addiction and a habit of losing his tools. He fixes helmets by hitting them with a rock, and repairs mail by tying broken links with string. He once tried to reinforce a soldier's breastplate using melted tin from stolen candlesticks. The result was flammable. No surprise then that most men simply repair their own gear using whatever materials they can borrow. One clever soldier named Hans has fashioned a shield from a barrel lid, reinforced with bones from a dead ox. Another uses chain links scavenged from a broken gate to patch his greaves. Necessity isn't the mother of invention here. Desperation is. Then comes the parade of parasite, fleas, ticks, lice. Every soldier's armor becomes a private ecosystem, alive with crawling things that bite and breed in the damp. Some men wrap garlic in cloth and tie it around their necks like a talisman. Others smear mud on their legs, convinced it deters insects. None of it worked. Dieter now sleeps sitting up, afraid that if he lies flat, the bugs will crawl into his ears. Food doesn't help either. It's all hard bread and half-rotten mane. No nutrients, no relief for skin or gut. The men are bloated from salt one day and dehydrated the next. Some start coughing up blood, not from wounds but from mold in the camp rations. One poor soul nearly chokes to death on a bone splinter hidden in a stew thick enough to patch a roof. Even sleep offers no escape. The hard earth digs into your spine, and the armor you're too afraid to remove presses into your ribs. Those who do take it off risk theft or ambush in the dark. Lucas once woke to find someone trying to unbuckle his cuirass. The thief didn't even want it for protection, just planned to trade it for a flask of beer. Priorities. Then there are the battles. If you think equipment matters during combat, you're absolutely right, which is why it's so tragic that most of it fails when it's needed most. A skirmish near a ruined monastery proves the point. Eberhardt's force, pressed into a chaotic ambush by rogue mercenaries, forms an uneven line. Arrows rain down, shields crack. One soldier, just 17, takes a crossbow bolt square to the gut through his mail shirt. The shirt was real, iron rings, properly linked, but it was second-hand and had been stretched over his chest too tightly. The bolt didn't bounce, it punched through. He dies within minute. Meanwhile, Lucas stumbles while crossing a creek bed, slips on a mossy stone, and falls flat onto a submerged tree root. His helmet slips forward, jamming over his eyes. He swings blindly and ends up slashing Dieter's thigh. Not deep, thankfully, just humiliating. And what of those fancy knights you see in paintings? Shiny plate armor, colorful capes, polished helmets. Yes, they exist, and no, they don't fight beside you. They arrive after the battle, or not at all, usually to deliver news. Drink from your supplies and ride away before the enemy counterattack. When one such knight does join a charge, his horse slips in the mud and sends him flying into a ditch. He survives, but only because 6 peasants dig him out like a pig from a bog. And let's not forget the weather. Rain, snow, blistering heat. It all finds its way into your armor. In summer, your gambeson becomes a personal oven. In winter, it turns into a sponge of cold, weighing twice as much when frozen. Metal burns and freezes with equal cruelty. One man licks his blade clean and tears the skin off his tongue. Another passes out from heat stroke wearing full gear under the sun. As time wears on, even Lucas, the camp's sarcastic philosopher, grows quiet. One night, after removing a splintered arrowhead from his calf with a sharpened spoon, he mutters, "I miss the monastery. At least there we just feared demons. Here we live among them." Dieter doesn't answer. He's too busy trying to boil water in his dented helmet. It doesn't hold heat well, but it's all he has. He pours in a few wild herbs, hoping to make something like tea. It tastes like scorched woolen grass. Better than nothing. This is not what soldiers are remembered for. Not the rot, the rash, the rusted seams, the aching knees. But it was the reality, the daily grind of suffering in gear that was barely fit for a scarecrow, let alone a soldier. The Holy Roman Empire may have claimed divine order, but for its fighters, life was chaos in armor. Chapter 3. Mercenaries and Mistrust. If you thought sharing a latrine pit with 50 other men was uncomfortable, try sharing a battlefield with mercenaries. By the time Dieter and Lucas reach the next rally point, a patchy encampment along the Danube surrounded by broken carts and buzzing flies, they're no longer just part of Count Eberhardt's livid local force. They've now been merged, without warning or explanation, into a larger expeditionary group assembled from half a dozen different territories. Each brings its own dialect, uniforms, saints and smell. But the real wildcard, the mercenaries, they go by many names. Landsnecks, Reisläufer, Condottieri, but you can call them what they really are, professional killers for hire, loyal to coin alone. They're flashy, loud, and carry swords taller than most of their employers. Their clothing is slashed in strange patterns, their hats are adorned with feathers, and many have scars that look like they were acquired during arguments with bears. To be fair, some of them are astonishingly effective. Hardened by years of campaigns in Italy or Burgundy, they march in tight formations, keep their weapons sharp, and laugh in the face of chaos. But here's the thing, you don't fight alongside mercenaries. You fight around them, and always with one eye over your shoulder. Within the first hour, Lucas spots a group of landsnecks gambling behind the mess tent with dice made from human teeth. One boasts of stabbing a man over a bowl of stew. Another is carving a crude depiction of a nun into the side of his crossbow. Dieter tries to strike up a conversation, and is met with silence. Then a smirk, then a warning. Stay out of our tent, and our boots. It's unclear if they mean stay out or don't steal them. But either way, Dieter wisely backs away. The problem with mercenaries isn't that they're brutal, it's that they know they're not going to be punished for it. They're essential, paid directly by nobles or bishops, who need victories, but don't trust their own ragged conscripts. And when pay runs late, these same mercenaries tend to supplement their income by helping themselves to whatever and whoever they want. One evening, a local miller's daughter, conscripted to help feed the troops, disappears from the camp. Her brother raises alarm. No one does a thing. Everyone knows which tent she was last seen near, but no one speaks aloud. Dieter doesn't sleep that night, not because of guilt, but because the silence is more terrifying than the screams. Worse, these mercenaries are now part of the command structure, or rather they ignore it entirely. Orders are barked in 4 different languages: Imperial Latin, Bavarian German, Italian, and something Dieter suspects is just yelling with confidence. The result is battlefield confusion so dense it could be bottled and sold as fog. Take, for example, the night raid. Scouts report enemy movement just past the tree line. A small group of rebellious knights planning a sabotage. Count Eberhard decides to send out 12 men to intercept. He assigns 6 locals and 6 mercenaries. Dieter and Lucas are among them. What should be a coordinated ambush quickly turns into theater of the absurd. The locals move quietly, crouched, spears ready. The mercenaries, they argue loudly over who gets to carry the torch, then stop to urinate against a tree halfway there. One pulls out a lute, yes, a lute, and strums a tune while waiting. By the time the enemy hears them, half the mission is already in retreat. Dieter takes a glancing blow to the shoulder. Lucas nearly loses an eye, and one mercenary dies, though not from combat. He tripped and fell into his own sword. The next morning a funeral is held. The mercenaries laugh throughout. He died as he lived, one says. Stupid, drunk, and bleeding. And still, they're paid more. While Dieter gnaws on hard bread and drinks from a shared flask of brackish water, the mercenaries sit around a fire roasting chickens confiscated from a nearby village. When someone protests, they flash a signed order from a noble clearly forged, but no one dares challenge it. Authority, after all, in the Holy Roman Empire is whoever holds the loudest voice and the sharpest blade. Lucas watches the spectacle with narrowed eyes. They feast, we bury the dead, they make jokes about it. Tell me again how we're all on the same side. Morale plummets. It's hard to bond with men who would steal your boots if you die. Harder still when those men march beside you and are your only line of defense against an enemy force that grows bolder by the day. Rumors spread that some mercenaries have already taken payment from both sides. Others plan to mutiny if their gold isn't delivered on time. And then there's the strange case of Ulrich the One-Eye, a grizzled veteran with half a face and 3 gold teeth. Ulrich doesn't speak much, but he watches everything. Dieter spots him digging through fallen comrades' pouches during battle cleanup. At first he thinks Ulrich is looking for money, then he sees him pocketing rings, buckles, even teeth. Never waste a good corpse, Ulrich mutters when asked. They're quieter than the living anyway. This is the lesson you learn in an army where coin buys more loyalty than gold. Trust is a weakness, honor is for the dead, and alliances are about as solid as the crusts of bread served at breakfast. The Holy Roman Empire claimed to unite Christendom under a divine banner, but out here in the mud and fire it's just patchwork loyalty, bought with bad silver and paid for with worse decisions. And as the next battle looms, mercenaries to the left, conscripts to the right, Dieter tightens his helmet strap and mutters to Lucas, "If I die today, make sure they don't steal my boots." Lucas replies without looking, "You'll be lucky if they wait that long." The tension between conscripts and mercenaries grows thicker than the smoke rolling out of the camp cookfires. It's not a matter of if something breaks, it's when. And when it does, it won't be on the battlefield. It'll be inside the so-called unified army itself. It begins, predictably, over food. A shipment of provisions arrives. Spoiled grains, dried beans riddled with weevils, and a few barrels of sour wine. The officers declare the barrels off limits to the common troops, reserving them for medicinal and ceremonial use. The next morning, 2 barrels are missing. Mercenaries are seen staggering around the supply tent, singing hymns with completely fabricated Latin lyrics. One of them throws up into his own boot and then continues to wear it. The conscripts grumble, whisper, glare. Lucas, standing near a fire, mutters, "At this point I'd rather be stabbed by the enemy. At least they're honest about wanting to kill me." Then comes the brawl. A Saxon conscript named Otto, massive, soft-spoken and generally harmless, finds one of the mercenaries rifling through his pack, not looting, just investigating, probably looking for anything edible, maybe a clean rag. Otto, exhausted and starving, pushes him back. The mercenary responds with a punch. What follows is less a fight and more a full-scale melee. 15 men pile into each other, punches, boots, helmets swung like clubs. Someone pulls a dagger. Someone else breaks a cooking pot over a man's head. Dieter watches from the edge, too stunned to intervene. He sees Lucas trip one mercenary by the ankle and then pretend to look innocent. When the dust settles, 3 men are unconscious, and one has a dislocated shoulder. Count Eberhard declares it an unfortunate miscommunication. No punishment is handed out. Everyone knows why. Punish the conscripts, and the whole army riots. Punish the mercenaries and they walk away, possibly right into the enemy camp. But mistrust doesn't vanish, it festers. Soon, the units start keeping separate fires, separate watch rotations, separate plans. During drills, mercenaries ignore commands, unless shouted by their own captain. One night, when a trumpet signals an incoming skirmish, the conscripts rise to arms, grabbing their weapons and forming into a shaky line. The mercenaries, they finish their meal first, and here's the kicker, they're better at it. When they finally saunter into formation, their line is straight, their pikes polished, their crossbows cocked and ready. They've done this before, they've killed for pay, marched for pay, deserted for pay, and they'll do it again, because no cause is holy enough to die broke. Meanwhile, Dieter's unit, a generous word, consists of barely trained farmhands and city apprentices, who can't tell a flanking maneuver from a sheep migration. They're terrified, not just of the enemy, but of the men beside them. And it's not just paranoia. One morning, a conscript from Swabia is found dead near the latrine trench, throat slit, pouch missing. Rumor spreads, it was an accident. Then a second body is found, then a third. Officers claim it's the enemy, everyone else knows better. Mercenaries don't always wait for the battlefield to make their profit. To make things worse, the Empire's fragmented command structure means no one is really in charge. Count Eberhard receives conflicting orders from two different dukes, both claiming authority over the region. One wants to march east, the other says hold the line. The result? Nothing. The army sits in a swamp, rotting, while nobles argue over parchment miles away. Meanwhile, mercenaries grow res, cless. Some haven't been paid in weeks. They start passing notes to one another. Dieter glimpses one, half burned in the fire. It lists prices for looted goods, helmets, swords, boots, and people. Desertion rumors swirl. Men whisper about an entire mercenary company that vanished overnight, just packed up and left. Others claim they were bribed by the rebels to switch sides. No one knows for sure. All Dieter knows is that the next morning, they're assigned patrol duty in the direction of the missing company. He and Lucas walk in silence for an hour through damp woods. Then Lucas breaks it. I wonder if we'd even notice if the war ended tomorrow. Dieter snorts. They'd forget to tell us, or charge us a tax to hear it. That's the core truth of soldiering in the Empire. You're not fighting for territory, for glory or for faith. You're fighting because someone wealthier decided it was your turn to bleed. And you're doing it beside men who view you less as a comrade and more as a walking source of resaleable parts. Even death doesn't bring peace. When a conscript dies, his gear disappears before the body cools. Lucas catches one mercenary lifting a pouch from a dying man and asks what he's doing. The mercenary shrugs. He won't need it. Eventually, the officers try a team-building solution. Joint drills between conscripts and mercenaries. It goes about as well as teaching cats to row a boat. One drill ends with a mercenary shouting "idiot peasant" at a conscript. The conscript throws a rock. The mercenary stabs him in the leg. The officer in charge calls it spirited competition. And through it all, the enemy watches. Whoever they are, rebels, raiders, rival lords' men. They don't even have to attack. Just wait for the infighting to eat the army from the inside. Wait for the pay to run out. Wait for the mercenaries to turn on their own. One night, during yet another useless meeting around a soggy map, Dieter asks Lucas, what happens when the mercenaries get tired of waiting? Lucas doesn't answer, he just tightens the straps on his boots and keeps his knife within reach. That's how it is in the army of the Holy Roman Empire. You march beside men you fear, take orders from leaders who disagree, and wear armor held together by prayer and string. And through it all, you trust no one, because the only certainty is that trust gets you killed faster than steel. Chapter 4. Feeding on mold and misery. There's hungry, and then there's war hungry. Dieter had known hunger before, missed meals, a lean winter, a bad harvest, but nothing quite prepares you for the culinary horror of an imperial army on campaign. It's not just the lack of food, it's the sheer creativity of the suffering. Meals that bite back, stews that grow things, bread that could double as a weapon. Welcome to the medieval military diet. It starts, as all disasters do, with poor planning. Supply lines in the Holy Roman Empire are like its politics, disjointed, contradictory, and mostly theoretical. Each lord is responsible for provisioning his own troops. Problem is, nobody told the lords that feeding men is just as important as stabbing the enemy. So rations are minimal, sporadic, and often spoiled before they even reach camp. On a good day, you might get a hunk of black bread hard enough to chip teeth, a chunk of salt pork that smells faintly like feet, and maybe a handful of dried peas. On a bad day, you scrape lichen off rocks and boil it with muddy water, and regret. Dieter's typical breakfast? A crust of bread soaked in wine vinegar, so it's soft enough to chew, and a single suspiciously oily strip of dried meat. He doesn't ask what kind of meat, it's better that way. Lunch? Not a thing. You're lucky if you can gnaw on a bit of raw onion someone dug out of a field. Dinner technically exists, usually a watery stew made from the day's leftovers. Bone shards, turnip peels, a few snails, and a generous helping of seasoning, which is to say ashes from the fire. Then there's the mold. It grows on everything. Bread, meat, cheese. If it was ever alive, it's now hosting something else. At first, soldiers try scraping it off, then they start eating around it. Eventually they just eat it. Mold becomes a food group. A particularly green batch of cheese earns the nickname plague jam after 3 men vomit for a full day, and one begins speaking in tongues. And don't forget the insects. Every sack of grain is a bustling metropolis of weevils. You get used to the crunch. Lucas claims it's added protein. He says this while picking lice from his bread and blowing them away like dandruff. One soldier bites into a biscuit, pauses, and calmly says, "Well, that moved," before continuing. Water is no salvation. The only nearby stream is brown, warm, and likely cursed. Soldiers are told to boil it, but fuel is limited and half the wood is wet, so they drink it raw. Diarrhea spreads faster than rumors. The latrines overflow. Men dig shallow holes or simply squat near the edge of camp. At night, the stench rolls in like fog. When illness hits, food becomes more of a threat than a cure. Boiled oats turn to slime. Pickled vegetables ferment into mush. Some attempt to forage, but they're untrained and desperate. One man eats a cluster of berries and dies in hours. Another finds mushrooms. Lucas warns him not to. He eats them anyway. The hallucinations are spectacular. The funeral less so. There's talk of hunting, but it's a joke. The surrounding forests have been stripped bare by a dozen previous armies. One soldier catches a rat and roasts it over the fire. He doesn't share. Dieter considers fighting him for it, then thinks better of it. The man has a crossbow and very little hope left. Some nobles bring their own food cartloads of salted meats, fresh bread, wine barrels. It's kept separate, guarded. One night a group of conscripts tries to sneak into the supply tent. They're caught. The punishment? Tied to a post and pelted with rotten cabbages for an hour. The next morning one of them is found dead face down in the mud, stomach bloated. No one speaks of it again. And yet somehow you still march, on empty stomachs, blistered feet, and hope as thin as the soup. Hunger sharpens the senses, then dulls them. Men begin dreaming of food, real food, roasted goose, fresh bread, butter melting over warm porridge. They wake up chewing their own sleeves. Lucas starts a game. Describe your last meal before death. His entry? A fried egg. Just one. I want to remember what normal tastes like. Dieter says nothing. He's forgotten what flavor feels like. Everything tastes like salt, dirt or mold. As the army moves toward the next siege, rations dwindle further. Officers issue new instructions, cut portions in half. The reasoning, motivate discipline. What it really motivates is mutiny, quietly, soft, the kind that brews in empty bellies and hollow eyes, the kind that simmers beneath the surface, waiting for the right push. The mercenaries of course fare better. They have gold and connections. They buy food from smugglers, roast meat behind canvas flaps. One night, the scent of cooked poultry wafts through camp. Dieter follows it, dreaming of roast skin and bone marrow. He finds the source, 2 mercenaries laughing, eating skewered quail. They see him. One tosses a bone in his direction. Chew on that, peasant. He does for the marrow, for the memory. It's not just physical suffering, it's psychological erosion. Hunger robs you of judgment, makes you paranoid. Every cough sounds like a challenge. Every man becomes a rival for the last bite. Fights break out over scraps. One soldier kills another over a beetroot. The killer is whipped. The beetroot is eaten. As if this weren't enough, the church decides to intervene, spiritually of course. A bishop traveling with the nobility declares that the hunger is a test of piety. He gives a sermon about fasting and martyrdom, while sipping watered wine and nibbling wafers blessed by his personal cook. He closes with, "Blessed are those who suffer in his name." No one. Dieter looks at Lucas, skin stretched thin over bones, lips cracked, and says, "I think I've been blessed enough." Lucas replies, "Tell that to my stomach, it hasn't seen God." just worms. This is how armies crumble. Not with glorious defeat on open battlefields, but with empty bowls and bloated corpses behind tents. The Holy Roman Empire, for all its pageantry, couldn't feed its soldiers, and when an empire cannot feed its army, it feeds them to the grave. By the third week of dwindling rations, the idea of meals becomes abstract. Dieter no longer dreams of feasts. He dreams of not vomiting after eating. That's the new luxury, eating something that doesn't send your bowels into a frenzy. The army has moved deeper into contested territory, which means supply lines are even more unreliable, and scavenging becomes a job no one volunteers for, but everyone ends up doing. Breakfast now consists of whatever can be stolen or dug out of old field caches. Lucas finds a buried pot of turnips behind an abandoned barn, half rotted and covered in mold. They boil it anyway, calling it victory stew. Dieter suggests they name every meal something ironic. That night's cold beans become Duke's banquet. The following morning's stale crust is dubbed Imperial Blessing. The humor doesn't help much. The Empire's solution to all this: send a scribe. Yes, a scribe. He arrives on horseback, bearing an imperial seal and an absurdly clean robe. His job? To assess morale. He interviews 3 officers, writes down some numbers, and leaves with the same amount of food he arrived with. When asked if more supplies are coming, he mutters something about logistical difficulty and rides off. His horse kicks mud into a soldier's face on the way out. Meanwhile, men begin eating leather. Not metaphorically, literally. Bootstraps, old belts, the bindings of books stolen from a looted monastery. They boil them, chew them, swallow bits that swell painfully in the stomach. One man tries to toast a piece of parchment, thinking the ink might add flavor. It doesn't. He spends the next day regretting it in a very loud, very wet fashion behind the latrines. The mercenaries remain frustratingly well fed. Their secret, side deals. Several have struck private arrangements with locals, trading coins, weapons, even armor for food. Some of them rob farms outright. Others escort supply carts meant for conscript forces, taking the best for themselves and blaming the rest on enemy raids. One conscript, driven mad by hunger, tries to steal from the mercenary stores. He's caught. They don't kill him. That would be too clean. Instead, they beat him and tie him to a post with a sign: thief, starved, fool. He's left there for a day. Lucas slips him water. Dieter gives him a crust. Officers turn a blind eye. Keep discipline, they say, as if discipline fills stomachs. Disease follows, of course. When the human body is weak, it opens its doors to every medieval guest imaginable. Dysentery, fever, tooth rot. Dieter watches a man's gums bleed for 3 days before the soldier stops waking up. Another falls into a fit of tremors after eating a spoiled onion. He bites his own tongue nearly off before dying. His body is buried with 6 others in a single pit, dug hastily in rocky soil. You'd think they'd send help, more food, medicine, a priest, anything. What arrives instead is a wagon filled with barrels of salted fish. A miracle, not quite. Half the barrels are rotten, the lids crawling with maggots. The officers take the clean ones. The rest are distributed among the lower ranks, but only after being rinsed in river water and resalted with sweat and curses. Lucas, always the optimist, says, at least the fish are already halfway to digestion. Dieter terse up after the first bite. At night, men talk about home, not family or farms, but food. One describes a meal so vividly you can almost smell it: rye bread, thick stew, roasted duck dripping fat onto cabbage. The next morning, he's dead. No wounds, no signs of struggle, just done. It's like the memory finished him. Then comes the horse. No one talks about eating the horses. They're valuable, sacred almost. They carry messages, pull carts, signal rank. But when one breaks its leg on the march, there's no hesitation. The officers insist it be disposed of respectfully. It disappears within the hour. Soldiers pretend not to know where it went. That night, fires burn longer, bellies are less hollow. No one says the word horse, but everyone sleeps better. The commanders issue new rules. No unauthorized foraging. Why? Because someone accidentally burned a barn. Another killed a friar's goat. One more trampled crops meant for the bishop's levy. The result: the church is furious. The army is forbidden from entering certain villages. Not that it matters. Those villages are just as hungry and twice as angry. And amidst all of this, battles still happen. You fight with a hollow core. Muscles refuse to tighten. Arms shake when raising a spear, and the metal of your armor feels twice as heavy. Dieter watches a man faint mid-charge, collapsing before the enemy even arrives. Another soils himself during combat and keeps swinging anyway. No one mocks him, they're all one bean away from the same fate. Then there's the bread riot. A wagon carrying fresh supplies for the officers gets stuck in a ditch. Word spreads fast. Soldiers swarm the site, tearing open sacks, grabbing whatever they can. Fists fly, swords are drawn. Someone sets fire to a cart just to create a distraction. It's chaos. By the time the officers arrive with whips and shouting guards, it's too late. The bread is gone, eaten, crushed or hoarded in secret. The response: punishments, public, brutal. 3 men are strung up by their wrists and lashed until they bleed. One collapses, convulsing. The others are sent back to duty. The bread never reappears. Dieter stops believing in deliverance. Lucas stops joking. That's when Dieter gets scared, because Lucas had always joked through the lice, the cold, the bad boots, the mercenaries. But now, silence. Food becomes a number, a half meal here, a quarter day's allowance there. Officers draw charts, soldiers draw lots. Arguments become fights, fights become stabbings. Hope becomes thinner than the soup. And through it all, the Empire issues proclamations of progress. Victory is near, the enemy is weakening, hold the line. But no one's listening. They're too busy chewing boiled leather and wondering what their own bones would taste like. Chapter 5. The Eternal Winter March. Winter doesn't arrive in the army with a gentle frost or the poetic hush of falling snow. No, winter kicks down the tent flap, climbs inside your boots, and starts gnawing at your toes. By the first week of December, every soldier in Count Eberhard's force understands one thing: the only thing worse than marching on an empty stomach is marching in the cold. The decision to move out came suddenly. Word arrived from a minor noble, whose name no one could pronounce, that the enemy had regrouped south of the Danube. So, naturally, the entire force was ordered to reposition. Logistics? Unclear. Roads? Frozen. Morale? Dead. The army moves like a sluggish beast across white-coated fields, each man dragging his own bundle of misery. Dieter's pack is frozen stiff. His boots squeak from the ice that's formed between the layers of worn leather and straw. Every breath stings. The hair in his nose freezes solid. The snot freezes too, forming little icicles that hang grotesquely until wiped off with a filthy sleeve. There is no coordination, no map anyone can read. Officers shout vague directions. Southwest. Follow the line, as if these mean anything in a forest, where even the birds have given up. Trail markers are covered in snow. Rivers look like fields. Fields look like death. Dieter stumbles every fifth step. The snow hides holes, frozen puddles, sharp root. One soldier disappears into a ditch and is pulled out by his ankles, howling. His arm is broken. He's given a rag to bite down on, and a prayer. Lucas mutters, "Well, at least we know the ditch is there now." Tents are a luxury. Most are torn or missing. Men sleep in piles. 3, 4, sometimes 5 huddled together like starving dogs. The cold doesn't just bite, it invades. You can feel it crawl inside your bones and whisper, "You won't make it." Firewood is rare. Trees are frozen solid and the ground is too hard to dig. When they do manage to light fires, the smoke barely rises. It freezes into the air, heavy and sharp. The scent of burning dunning and wet socks fills every breath. One man tries to warm his feet by the fire and ends up burning off 3 toes. The march continues. Meals now come in the form of dried beans frozen into solid clumps. Soldiers break them with rocks and boil them into mush. Most carry their cooking pot on their person now, usually a dented helmet. If you're lucky, it doesn't leak. If you're very lucky, someone hasn't stolen it yet. Lucas has taken to wrapping his feet in strips of parchment, pages from a scribe's ledger discarded weeks ago. A little bit of literature between the toes, he says. His sense of humor is returning, but it's thinner than the ice on a horse trough. Dieter barely responds. His lips are cracked and scabbed. Talking hurts. Frostbite is spreading through the ranks. Fingers blacken, then curl. Toes go numb, then vanish. No one talks about it. They just hide their feet and hide. The camp surgeon, if you can call him that, has a rusty bone saw and a leather strap to bite. There is no alcohol. The last bottle was drunk by 3 officers, who then passed out in a hay cart and missed the departure. They're presumed dead. No one cares, and still they march. At night, wolves circle the perimeter. They smell weakness. Sometimes they howl, sometimes they don't. One morning, a man is missing, just gone. No tracks, no blood. His pack is found, but nothing else. Lucas draws a wolf on the inside of his tent scrap and calls it Private Reinhardt. Dieter doesn't laugh. Then comes the river, frozen over, wide as a village. Officers debate crossing. One insists the ice will hold. Another wants to build rafts. No one listens to either. A captain on horseback tries first, trots out, declares the path safe. 10 paces later, the ice cracks. He disappears, horse and all. Silence follows. Then the slow, distant sound of bubbles. They still cross, not by choice, by necessity. They crawl on all fours, spacing out every few yards. No one speaks. Every creak beneath their feet is a death sentence. Lucas carries his crossbow tied to his back with twine and mutters, "If I die in this river, tell people it was glorious." Dieter replies, "If you die in this river, I'm wearing your boot." The other side is no better. Snow, more snow, forests of bare trees, branches like the ribs of dead giants. They pass a ruined hamlet, just a few walls and a collapsed barn. Inside they find frozen corpses. Civilian, likely locals who refused to flee or had nowhere else to go. Dieter counts 7. One still clutches a child, both stiff as statues. Lucas pulls a blanket from one and says nothing. They burn the house. Not for punishment, but for warmth. It's the only wood that will catch fire. The smell is sickening. Old mold, frozen flesh, damp straw. But the heat is real. For a moment they feel something like life. But it fades, always does. The Empire continues to issue orders, vague and absurd. Reinforce the bishop's line. Secure the western path. Prepare for engagement. These commands arrive by messenger. A boy with blue lips and no gloves. He dies within a day. They bury him under a pine tree. No marker. Lucas names it command post. By now the army has split into fragments. Some units never catch up. Others veer off, lost to the snow. One group turns back. They're later found half-eaten by wolves. Another camps too close to a frozen lake. The ice gives way during the night. No one survives. And through all this there is no enemy. Not a single sword drawn. No clash of steel. Just cold. The real war isn't against rebels or rival lords. It's against the season. Against your own body. As Dieter limps into another meaningless clearing, he looks at Lucas and says, "Do you remember what warmth felt like?" Lucas pauses. "I think it owed me money." They both chuckle. It's hollow, but it's sound. This is the winter march. Not a journey, not a mission. Just slow erosion. One blister, one frostbitten toe, one frozen breath at a time. No medals, no songs, just pain painted in white. If you think there's a bottom to misery, winter in the Empire assures you there's always another layer beneath your frostbitten feet. For Dieter, that realization hits somewhere around day 12 of the march. He's not entirely sure anymore when he wakes up, unable to bend his fingers, and finds his boots frozen to the ground. Not stiff, frozen, solid. He has to break the ice with a rock just to free them, then spend 20 minutes reheating his toes using body heat and curses. Lucas, ever the problem solver, has stuffed straw into his sleeves and tied rags around his shins. He looks like a scarecrow who lost a fist fight. "At least the wind's not screaming today," he says, teeth chattering through a layer of snot. Dieter nods. The wind isn't screaming. Today it's just groaning, low, steady and personal, like it wants you to remember every mistake you made that led you here. And they're still marching, not toward a battle, but toward positioning. Always repositioning, always preparing, never actually doing. The concept of progress has become mythical, like dragons or noble emperors. They pass the same bent tree 3 times. Each time an officer insists it's a different one. Dieter carves a mark into it just to check. It isn't. Even the animals have quit. The oxen pulling the supply carts grow skeletal. One collapses mid-march and is left behind. No one bothers with mercy. The cart it pulled is stripped of anything useful and burned for warmth. The smell of scorched wood mingles with singed hide. Dieter turns away. Lucas doesn't. "Smells better than the bread," he mutters. That night, they shelter under what used to be a blacksmith shed, roof gone. Walls crooked, floor soaked with ice. It's better than open air, barely. Dieter shares a spot with 3 others. One coughs blood in his sleep. Another babbles nonsense in Latin. The third, older, doesn't wake up at all. The officers pretend nothing's wrong. To keep up appearances, Count Eberhard insists on maintaining disciplined formations. Every morning, the men are forced to line up, crooked, shivering rows of half-dead soldiers, while an officer walks the line and reads from a scroll. Today's reading, a blessing from the Archbishop of Mainz. It ends with the words, "For the glory of Christ and Empire." A soldier vomits into the snow halfway through. No one reacts. The noblemen still ride, of course. Horses draped in blankets. Guards wrapped in fine wool cloaks. One passes Dieter without so much as a glance, sipping wine from a pewter flask. His boots gleam, his face is flushed. Lucas leans close and says, "Let's kill him and steal his shoes." He says it as a joke, maybe, and then comes the storm. They'd hoped the worst was over. It wasn't. Snow begins to fall in waves, first gently, then like the sky wants revenge. Visibility drops to 10 feet, footing vanishes. You march blind, trusting the shape ahead is your friend, and not some abandoned scarecrow marking the edge of a frozen well. One soldier is lost within minutes, wandered off to relieve himself and never returns. Another is crushed when a cart overturns on a slope. They try to dig him out. The ground is too hard. He becomes part of the path. By the next day, half the units are lost. Orders can't travel. The trumpets are clogged with ice. The standard bearers wrap their flags around their bodies for warmth. It's the first time the Imperial Eagle has been used as a blanket. A poetic detail for a very unpoetic day. Desperation sets in. Men begin discarding gear, mail shirts, shields, even weapons. The weight becomes unbearable. Dieter drops his knife somewhere between two pine trees and doesn't look back. Lucas sells his belt for a piece of smoked lard. The buyer eats it in one bite. Later that night, Lucas regrets everything. The next morning, an argument erupts over firewood. One man accuses another of stealing his logs. The accused pulls a dagger. A scuffle breaks out. Dieter watches it unfold slowly. Two skeletons swinging arms too tired to cause real harm. Eventually they fall into the snow and lie there breathing heavily, too exhausted to finish the fight. No one intervenes. Then from the woods, a shape. Not enemy, not animal, a figure cloaked, alone, leading a mule with bundles strapped to its back. A trader, a miracle. He offers food, not for free, not for faith, for silver. Of course, his prices are absurd. One stale loaf, 1 imperial coin. A hunk of smoked meat, 3. Dried berries, 5. Lucas tries to bargain with a knife. The trader laughs. "You think I need more knives?" He lifts his cloak to reveal 2 dozen already strapped to his chest. "I need coral boots." Dieter offers his boots. The trader inspects them, scoffs. They're halfway to being soup. In the end, they trade Lucas's flint, Dieter's wool scarf, and a wooden rosary for a single wedge of cheese. They eat it that night in silence. It tastes like victory and shame. They don't sleep better, but they sleep with full stomachs, which is almost the same thing now. Morning brings more cold, always more cold, and a message. The siege begins in 2 days. Siege, that word hangs heavy. It means digging trenches with frozen fingers. It means sleeping under walls, soaked in enemy piss. It means dying slowly, but this time with a purpose. Lucas squints at the message and says, "I thought we were marching to resupply the northern flank." Dieter replies, "Maybe we are, maybe it's the same place." They both laugh, they both know. The truth is, no one really knows where they are. No one remembers why this war began, or who's winning, or if anyone's keeping score. What they do know is the snow is real, the hunger is real, and the pain is real. The Empire, that patchwork of politics and paper crowns, may pretend it commands these men, but out here in the white silence, command belongs to the cold. Chapter 6. Castles that never fall. If hell had a waiting room, it would look like a siege camp. Forget gallant knights storming towers with banners flying. In the Holy Roman Empire, a siege was less about heroism, and more about sitting in the cold, eating mold, and dying slowly, if you were lucky. Fast deaths were reserved for the idiots who volunteered to carry ladders. By the time Dieter and Lucas arrive at the outskirts of Castle Hochbruck, an old stone fortress clinging to a frozen cliff like a barnacle, they've marched for over 3 weeks, lost 15 men to exposure, and traded every edible thing not nailed down, and now they get to wait. The first sign that a siege has begun isn't cannon fire or war drums. It's digging, lots of it. The officers hand out shovels and tell them to start trenches. The ground is solid rock, the shovels are bent. After an hour, Dieter has a hole the size of a stew bowl and a palm covered in blisters. The officer passes by and says wider. Lucas mutters, "I'll make it wide enough to bury him." Sleeping arrangements? Dirt, mud, frozen hay if you're lucky. A few men cobble together tents from discarded cloaks and rotted animal hides. Dieter shares his shelter with a man who snores like a dying mule and smells worse. In the mornings they find ice on their blankets on the inside. There's no frontal assault. The Empire, in its infinite wisdom, has chosen the wait them out strategy. Siege them until they starve. A bold move, especially when your own soldiers are already starving. Lucas asks, what happens if they have more food than we do? No one answers. Siege warfare in the Empire wasn't about speed or precision. It was about politics. Every noble wanted credit, none wanted casualties. So the camp sprawls in lazy circles while inside the castle, the defenders shout insults from the walls. One calls the Imperial army a travelling dung heap, another tosses a loaf of bread over the wall just to taunt them. The loaf is retrieved, sniffed and devoured within 30 seconds. To keep morale up, Eberhard declares daily roll calls and mandatory prayers. One soldier, delirious from hunger, begins praying to his boots. Another mistakes a tree stump for a bishop and confesses out loud. The officers don't care. As long as men are upright, they count them as ready. Then comes the first casualty, not from battle but from trench rot. A conscript from Franconia loses circulation in both feet. They turn black. The surgeon, drunk on medicinal wine, saws them off with a kitchen knife. He dies of infection 3 days later. No one wants his boots. Lucas develops a cough that sounds like a cracked bell. Dieter wraps his scarf tighter and pretends it's not contagious. He saw what happened to the last man who collapsed in line. They buried him next to the latrines because the ground was softer there. Entertainment is non-existent. A few mercenaries play dice, others wrestle for scrap. One duo stages a play using sticks. The Siege of Logic, they call it. In it, a commander orders an attack, then changes his mind, then gets killed by his own men. Everyone laughs, except the officers. The castle meanwhile remains infuriatingly intact. Catapults are brought in, ancient things wheezing with age. The engineers build them out of scavenged timber and optimism. On the third day they launch a rock the size of a pig directly into the moat. It splashes. Everyone cheers anyway. Dieter is assigned to the firewood detail, which means wandering into the woods, cutting down frozen trees and dragging the logs back, while avoiding patrols from the castle's defenders. He nearly gets skewered by a crossbow bolt his first day. After that, he walks in a zigzag. Lucas suggests painting themselves as trees. Dieter replies, "I'd rather be firewood than a joke." Then come the rumors that the castle has secret tunnels, that supplies are being smuggled in by night, that there's a spy among the camp. Everyone suspects everyone. Paranoia replaces hunger. One man accuses another of hoarding food. They fight. The accused is stabbed with a spoon. Death by spoon. New low. The siege stretches on. Snow turns to slush. Slush to mud. Mud to despair. Clothes are never dry. Feet are never warm. Dieter's hands develop permanent cracks. Lucas's lips turn blue. Rats scurry freely. Some soldiers catch them, cook them, share the tail like a delicacy. No reinforcements come. No change in strategy. No sign of surrender. One night someone tries to scale the wall. A lone soldier, drunk or desperate or both, climbs a siege ladder and vanishes over the battlements. The next morning his head is tossed back over the wall with a note in his mouth. Nice try. Still, the officers insist progress is being made. Count Eberhard orders a show of strength, a formation march in front of the enemy walls. Half the troops collapse from cold, the other half forget their drills. The defenders laugh, throw a chamber pot off the wall, and return inside. The smell lingers for days. Inside the castle, they probably have fire, food, blankets. Outside, in the glory of imperial siegecraft, Dieter chews on pine needles to keep from grinding his teeth into dust. Lucas offers him a rock, says, "Pretend it's soup." They both laugh, then cough, then fall asleep against each other under a half-torn tarp, while snow sneaks into their bones again. This is siege warfare. Less combat, more comedy. Less conquest, more constipation. And all under the banner of an empire too proud to admit that sometimes castles don't fall. Sometimes they just sit there, while the army falls apart instead. By week 4 of the siege, the snow has melted into mud, the latrines have overflowed into trenches, and hope has officially died. The fortress still stands, mocking them with its dry towers, its warm fires, its walls that refuse to crack. Castle Hochbrook hasn't fired a single shot in days, and yet somehow it's winning. The Imperial camp, on the other hand, is rotting, literally. Everything stinks. The meat, the boots, the men. The trench water smells like regret and mould. Dieter's gambeson is soaked through, and now emits a sour fungal odour that even Lucas refuses to stand near. They're both itching, coughing and wheezing, walking infections with helmets. Disease spreads fast. With every bite of old pork or sip of suspicious water, someone else drops. First it was dysentery, then fevers, then something no one can identify but everyone fears. One soldier's skin turned yellow. Another started bleeding from his nose. The field surgeon gave up around body number 12, and now just paces around the fire muttering prayers. Graves are dug daily, shallow ones, fast and sloppy. Some corpses aren't even buried. They're just hauled behind bushes or stacked behind carts. At night, the dogs come. No one stops them. Everyone pretends not to hear the chewing. Command pretends it's all fine. Officers still dress in their fine sashes and call for morning roll. Glory awaits, one of them shouts. The man next to him has lost 3 toes and can barely stand. Lucas asks aloud, is Glory going to carry him back to camp? No one laughs. Boredom sets in, the kind of boredom that corrodes reason. With no enemy to fight and no purpose beyond wait here, the men begin turning on each other. Petty disputes become brawls. Someone steals a whetstone and loses a finger for it. Someone else swipes a blanket and ends up stabbed with a tent peg. Dieter watches 2 grown men fight over a dead squirrel. The loser gets the bones. The mercenaries, predictably, do better. They've set up a semi-permanent camp on higher ground, with better drainage and even a small cooking spit. Rumor has it they bribed the quartermaster for extra supplies. Lucas calls them the real nobility. They call everyone else the bait. Still, not even they can pretend forever. Their wages are late again. Whispers of desertion ripple through the camp like smoke. One morning, an entire detachment is gone. No note, just missing. Eberhard calls it a strategic repositioning. Dieter calls it realistic. And then comes the cannon. Not from the defenders, from the Empire. After weeks of delay, a siege bombard finally arrives. Dragged by oxen and manned by a crew of Swabian engineers, the entire camp gathers to watch it fire. It's a lumbering beast of cast bronze and squealing wheels. Someone plays a trumpet. Lucas mutters, "Here comes salvation." The cannon fires once. The ground shakes. The shot sails over the wall and smashes into a tree. Cheers erupt anyway. The cannon fires again. The recoil knocks it off its wooden platform. It takes 3 hours to reset it. When it fires a 3rd time, the ball strikes the outer wall finally. A small crack forms. Every soldier leans forward. The defenders fix it with mortar by sundown. So much for salvation. Back in camp, morale plummets further. Dieter wakes to find his left boot missing, probably stolen by someone with fewer toes. He wraps the foot in rags and continues like nothing's wrong. Lucas offers him a slice of old jerky in sympathy. It snaps like bark when bitten. The commander calls for a night raid finally. Something to do. 20 men are chosen. Dieter and Lucas are not among them, but they watch as the unit disappears into the darkness, ladders in hand. By morning 5 return. The rest, dead, captured, missing. One of the survivors has an arrow in his thigh and a blank stare. He hasn't blinked since sunrise. The officers call it a success. Dieter begins recording the absurdities. He scratches them into the inside of his scabbard like some kind of sad journal. Day 28, our soup moved. No one stopped eating. Day 31, a man claimed to see God in the latrines. It wasn't a vision, it was Lucas covered in ash. Day 33, they fired the cannon again, hit a cow. In one surreal moment, the castle tosses out bread, a single perfect loaf, wrapped in cloth. It sails over the wall and lands in the mud. 2 soldiers race to grab it. One breaks the other's nose. The loaf is torn apart in seconds, eaten, rolled in mud, still devoured. The message is clear. The defenders are mocking them. They're comfortable, warm, fed, waiting. That's what breaks men in a siege. Not arrows or boiling oil or swords from above. It's the knowledge that the enemy sleeps better than you, eats better, laughs harder, and only needs to wait. One morning, Dieter sees steam rise from the castle kitchens. He stares. Lucas stares too. They both imagine what it smells like. Probably pork or beef stew. Maybe fresh bread. They close their eyes and pretend. When they open them, the wind smells like wet socks again. The final insult comes with the truce. A messenger arrives under a white banner, not from the Empire, from the defenders. They offer nothing major, a surrender of the outlying farms, a small tax and an agreement to let the Imperial army walk away. Eberhard refuses, of course. We hold the advantage, he insists. Dieter thinks about the lice in his underclothes and the corpse pile behind the soup tent. Advantage. Siege drags on. Another week, another storm, another trench collapses, burying a sleeping soldier. He's not found until 2 days later. Dieter helps pull out the arm, just the arm. Lucas vomits in the corner. One night, Dieter whispers, "They say castles never fall." Lucas replies, "Neither do graves." Chapter 7. Ghosts of the Peasant Crusades. The fortress eventually yields, not to valor or siegecraft, but boredom. The defenders offer tribute, the commanders accept it, and the army is ordered to prepare for withdrawal. There is no cheer, no trumpet, just the sound of carts being loaded, tents collapsing, and the cannon being dragged away like a rusted relic. They never even breach the walls. The Empire declares victory anyway. Of course it does. Dieter, still limping from frostbite and missing a fingernail, listens to a cleric announce the army's next glorious task, marching east toward a town called Waldkirchen. Apparently heretics have been spotted. The word hangs in the air like a mouldy curtain. Heretics, the Empire's favorite catch-all for anyone inconvenient. They always show up when we run out of real enemies, Lucas says, while wrapping his ankle with a strip of parchment torn from a bishop's decree. Can't beat a stone wall, try theology. But there's something different in the way the officers speak now. Less urgency, more ritual. Every order begins with "by divine duty." Soldiers are told to prepare for a cleansing march. The banners are red and gold again, colors of crusade. Rumors start, whispers about relics, blessings, indulgences. That word crusade has weight, because every soldier in the Holy Roman Empire knows about the peasant crusades, or rather what's left of them. Decades earlier, waves of poor farmers, beggars, students and zealots had been riled up by fiery sermons and promises of salvation, told that Jerusalem needed them, that God himself had called them. Thousands marched, with no training, no weapons, just faith. They didn't even make it halfway. They were ambushed, massacred, sold into slavery. Some starved, others froze. The few that reached the Holy Land were slaughtered upon arrival. The Church, later, would quietly refer to them as overzealous. The soldiers of the Empire remember them as ghosts, not martyrs, just another pile of bones scattered across Europe's forgotten roads. Lucas calls them God's compost. Now as they prepare to march in their footsteps, the officers try to dress it up with ceremony. A local priest is brought in to bless the troops. He walks through the ranks waving incense over lice-ridden soldiers who haven't bathed in weeks. Dieter tries not to cough. Lucas bows mockingly. The priest delivers a sermon about purity, sacrifice, and eternal reward. To die in holy service is to be reborn in glory, he declares. Behind him a soldier quietly retches into a helmet. No one rebukes him. Glory, it seems, smells like spoiled turnip soup. The army moves out again. Waldkirchen is 3 days' march. The roads are narrow, muddy, and lined with skeletal trees. They pass through villages still blackened from past conflicts. One hamlet has no people, just empty homes, a ruined chapel, and a row of crosses leaning like drunkards. That night, around the fire, Lucas asks Dieter, "You ever wonder what happened to those crusaders, the ones before us?" Dieter pokes at the fire. "I know what happened. They died believing someone would remember. No one did," Lucas says, "not even the people who sent them." That's the lesson no one speaks aloud in the Empire's armies, that your blood means less than your banner. That sacrifice is currency for men who never pay their own debts, and nowhere is that truth more naked than in religious campaigns. The heretics they're sent to fight, no one really knows who they are. Some say they're a splinter group of Anabaptists. Others say they're just villagers refusing to pay tithe. One rumor says they built their own church and sing hymns in the wrong key. The officers don't care. They have orders. They have a mandate. They have a pre-approved sin exemption. As they approach Waldkirchen, things grow quieter. The birds vanish. The trees creak. One of the scouts finds a corpse hanging from a branch, mouth stuffed with parchment. A sermon, probably. Lucas reads the first line and says, "Looks better than what the bishop said yesterday." There's no formal resistance, no battle, just silence. The enemy camp is a collection of huts near the river. When the Imperial forces arrive, they find it empty, not burnt, not looted, just gone. Beds unmade, bread left on tables, a pot still warm. It's like the people vanished into mist. Some claim it's sorcery, others say they fled. Dieter wonders aloud, what if they were never here? The officer leading their column smacks him on the shoulder and says, "Don't speak blasphemy," as if asking questions is more dangerous than swinging swords. And so, in the grand tradition of medieval warfare, they destroy what they don't understand. The huts are torched, the livestock slaughtered. A sacred book, handwritten, beautifully illustrated, is tossed into the fire because it doesn't bear the right bishop's seal. One soldier urinates on a woven tapestry, another pockets a silver spoon and calls it divine reward. Later, the priest returns. He gives another blessing. He praises the soldiers for their righteous fury. Lucas, staring at the flames, asks Dieter, "You think any of those peasant crusaders did this too, burned villages and called it holy?" Dieter answers without thinking. They probably believed it. That's the tragedy really, not the death, not even the absurdity. It's the belief, the way men are taught to see conquest as duty, slaughter as salvation, and blind obedience as virtue. The peasant crusades were a lesson no one learned, and now their ghosts follow every army that marches in God's name. The next morning, the wind shifts. Smoke rises from the ruins of Waldkirchen. The army moves on. No one speaks of what happened. Officially it was a heretic outpost. Unofficially it was a village with no weapons and too many questions. Dieter adds a note to his scabbard. Day 41, burned a house because the hymn was off key. Victory declared. No enemy found. Lucas whispers that night. One day will be the ghosts people forget. Dieter closes his eyes and mutters. We already are. The further they march, the more Dieter starts to notice something odd. Nobody knows where they're going. Not the officers, not the scouts, not even the priest who insists every step is guided by divine light. Each new direction is contradicted by a new scroll. First it's east to reinforce another garrison, then it's south to root out more heretics. Then, confusingly, they double back west to secure a trade route. Lucas mutters, next they'll march us in a circle and call it a pilgrimage. But this isn't incompetence, it's a tradition. The Empire's holy campaigns have always been half logistics, half improvisation. There are too many nobles with too many agendas. One wants land, another wants indulgences, a third just wants to look important in front of the archbishop. The soldiers, they're caught in the middle. Tools to be repurposed at will, and lately, those tools are wearing thin. 3 men collapse during the morning march. One faints mid-step and falls face first into a puddle. He doesn't get back up. The priest says his soul was heavy with sin. Lucas replies, or maybe just exhausted and full of bad cheese. He's ignored. That night a motivation ceremony is ordered. Torches are lit. The bishop arrives with a relic wrapped in velvet, allegedly a splinter from the true cross. He holds it aloft chanting. Soldiers are told to touch it for blessing. Dieter does, if only to avoid notice. Lucas declines, saying, last time I touched a splinter it gave me an infection. Behind them someone coughs blood. Another vomits behind a cart. The relic keeps circling. The priests keep chanting. The next morning, they find a shrine. Not part of any plan, just a roadside structure, old and worn, likely built by villagers decades ago. It's beautiful in a rough, handmade way. Painted saints, a chipped statue of Mary, an altar with a candle long burned out. The bishop declares it heretical, unlicensed iconography, orders it destroyed. A few soldiers hesitate. Lucas doesn't move. Dieter steps forward, not to defend it, but to speed things along. He knows how this works. Protest, and you join the kindling. So the shrine is torn down, the statue smashed. The bishop declares the area cleansed, and just like that, another piece of faith vanishes under the boot of empire. Dieter adds it to the list in his scabbard. Day 44, burned a shrine, learned nothing, moved on. The line between holy and horrific has blurred so thoroughly that even the priests seem unsure. One morning, a sermon warns against false idols, then ends with a prayer to the emperor. Another declares that dying for faith is glorious, but doesn't explain why those who survive keep dying inside. Morale is threadbare, rations are thinner than ever, and then comes the mud. Weeks of melting snow turn the roads into sludge, wagons sink, horses slip. Men lose boots mid-step and keep walking barefoot, because stopping means freezing. Lucas loses his left boot entirely and ties a rag around his foot soaked in pig fat. Anointed, he jokes, by bacon. Some days they cover less than a mile. Others, they're marched 15 leagues, with no rest, chasing rumors of heretic uprisings that vanish on arrival. One such village, Ortwald, is nothing but a sawmill and a chapel. The locals don't resist. They don't even speak. They just stare as the soldiers dig trenches and build fires with their fence posts. The chapel is examined. It has 3 icons instead of the standard 2. That's enough. It's deemed impure. Dieter and 5 others are ordered to pull it down. He does it mechanically, plank by plank, while the villagers watch in silence. Afterward, Lucas leans against the ruined altar and says, "You think when they write this down we'll be the heroes?" Dieter spits. "No, we won't be written down at all." That night, a soldier stabs his own foot, just to be sent home. He's denied. Self-harm is a sin, the chaplain says. The next day, the man throws himself into a frozen creek. They fish him out, beat him and tie him to a cart. He's dragged the rest of the way like luggage. As they reach the edge of a new town, Kleinfeld, they see something unexpected. A wooden cross, freshly built. Around it villagers kneel, singing quietly. Not rebels, not heretics, just scared people praying the empire passes them by. The officer in charge declares them suspiciously devout. He wants to investigate. The priest agrees. The soldiers sigh. But something strange happens. The priest, older than most, with eyes like wet ash, stops mid-order. He looks at the villagers, then at the soldiers, then at the ground, and for once he says nothing, just nods, and walks away. No fire, no arrests, just silence. That night, Lucas stares at the stars and whispers. Maybe the ghosts got to him. Dieter asks, what ghosts? You know, the ones we make every time we march somewhere, and leave nothing but ash behind. The next morning, the orders change. Again, they're not going to Kleinfeld. They're being redirected. New heresy reported near the mountain passes. Lucas laughs. That's what we're doing now, isn't it? Chasing heresy uphill. Dieter replies, we're not chasing it, we're dragging it with us. Somewhere beneath the cracked banners and crusted armor, every man in the column knows this isn't a crusade anymore. It's a scavenger hunt for meaning, and the deeper they go, the more they forget why they started at all. No one speaks of Jerusalem. No one speaks of salvation. Just of surviving long enough to return to a home that might not recognize them anymore. Chapter 8. Nobles don't die in war. In theory, war is the great equalizer. Death doesn't check your title before swinging the sword. Mud stains silk, and burlap the same color. And arrows? Arrows are famously disinterested in genealogy. But whoever wrote that never served in the Holy Roman Empire's army, where rank isn't just power, it's protection. Dieter learns this the hard way, when their column is halted for half a day, not because of bad weather, enemy activity, or even a broken cart. No, it's because Baron Conrad von Rheinfelden's wine shipment had gone missing. 3 barrels of expensive Riesling, meant for the noble officer's tent, allegedly stolen by conscripts. Entire patrols are pulled from guard duty to investigate. They never find the wine, but 3 men are flogged anyway. No trial, no proof, just the Baron's narrowed eyes and a shrug. Someone has to pay, he says, sipping watered-down ale with a grimace. Dieter watches the lashes tear open the back of a boy who hadn't spoken all morning, and thinks he'll remember this more than any battle. That's the day it clicks. The war the nobles are fighting isn't the one the soldiers are dying in. Baron Conrad, Count Eberhard, Sir Matthias of Altenwald, names repeated with awe and deference, don't walk on the same mud. Their tents are separate, their boots dry, their meals warm and mysteriously well stocked. When the rest of the army eats boiled oats, they dine on salted fish and venison. When the weather turns, their cloaks grow thicker. When things go wrong, they are never blamed. Orders come down like thunder from silk-lined mouths. But in battle, they rarely leave the rear line. Their squires hold their helmets. Their pages carry their maps. Their command tents are filled with candles, parchments and arguments about land rights while conscripts bleed out over trench walls. Lucas sums it up best one night, poking at a rat roasting on a stick. They fight wars like it's a chess match, and we're the pawns that think we matter because we're on the board. One morning, a knight dismounts and inspects the line. His armor gleams, freshly polished, not a scratch. He lifts his visor and smiles at the shivering troops. Courage, he says. The enemy fears a united front. Then he remounts and rides off. That same afternoon, 8 men die in an ambush. None of them were nobles. The knight isn't seen again for days. It's not that nobles never die, it's that their deaths are remembered, written down, sung about, illustrated in cathedral murals. When Sir Wilhelm of Tyrol fell in battle, a monk wrote 5 pages about his final prayer. When Lucas nearly lost a hand, the surgeon called him disposable. And then there's the armor. Most conscripts wear stitched leather or rusty mail that smells like the previous owner. Nobles wear steel plate, custom fit, polished, adorned with house crests. Arrows bounce off them, blades slide away. One noble even wore a chainmail scarf. Dieter saw it up close. It sparkled. He'd lost count of how many times he watched a foot soldier charge headlong, while the noble waited, sword unsheathed, until the dust settled. In one skirmish, Dieter saw a noble draw his blade only after the enemy had turned and fled. He then claimed victory with a speech so long it nearly undid the win. The nobles also bring musicians, lutes, horns, a drummer who plays from a gilded stool. Not for morale is dead, but to remind everyone who funded the war. One evening, as men stitched wounds by firelight, the drummer played a triumphant march. Lucas threw a pebble at his head. The officer reprimanded Lucas. It's not just equipment and comfort, it's belief. Nobles are taught that war is a burden they manage, not endure. That their role is strategic, not sacrificial. That their deaths should be rare, shocking, and above all, useful. Dieter once overheard a young noble, barely 16, say, "A commander's life is worth 1,000 men." No one corrected him. 1,000 men heard it. No one protested. What would be the point? There's a particular moment Dieter will never forget. It's after a failed siege maneuver. 10 dead, 4 wounded, dozens limping. A noble knight, Sir Adalbert, stands before the survivors and says, "The burden of command weighs heavy. I feel each loss deeply." He then mounts his horse, rides to a private tent, and drinks mulled wine, while his servant massages his shoulders. One of the survivors, the youngest, tries to repeat the speech later. He breaks down halfway through and walks into the woods. He doesn't return. To maintain the illusion of shared struggle, nobles occasionally appear in formation. They walk the line, ask meaningless questions. Is morale holding? Have you seen any heretics? One even asks Dieter, "Is the soup still hot enough?" Dieter doesn't reply. He's been eating bark for 3 days. The nobles get medals, crests, scrolls of commendation. They attend meetings with bishops and scribes. Soldiers get splinters and worms, and sometimes, if they're lucky, they get a name carved onto a wooden plank over a shallow grave. And yet some believe. Some of the younger soldiers still look at nobles with awe. They mimic their posture, quote their speeches, try to earn their favor. They think honor is contagious, that proximity to command elevates their worth. They are usually the first to die. Dieter's not bitter. Not anymore, he's just realistic. He knows that in the Empire's theater, the nobles write the script, and the soldiers fill the graves. Lucas, ever more cynical, keeps a list of the officers who've stepped in mud. It's a short list, 2 names, and one of them was drunk. When a noble does die, it's an event, trumpet, mourning, a holy service. The entire camp pauses. Men are ordered to clean their tunics. A bard writes a dirge. When a soldier dies, the rats are faster than the prayers. The longer you march under noble command, the more you realize their version of war happens on parchment, not in mud. While men like Dieter slog through ice, arrows, and festering boils, the nobility fight a different battle: paperwork, permissions, heraldic rites, who outranks whom during shared latrine usage. In the camps near Riedstadt, things reach new levels of farce. Word arrives that 2 noble families, von Lenzburg and von Geren, are both claiming credit for a recent victory. What victory? No one knows. It may have been the capture of a mill, or the death of a single rebel with one shoe. Either way, the squabble lasts 3 days. During that time, all movement is halted. Patrols are cancelled. Supplies are delayed. 3 soldiers die of exposure waiting for a shipment of firewood that never came because a cart couldn't pass through the Baron's fencing match. The bickering ends with a formal duel, on foot, with pageantry, witnessed by priests and scribes. Lucas, sitting nearby, eats a half-frozen onion and says, "They're fighting for credit over a thing we didn't even win." Brilliant. Dieter watches as both nobles swing at each other like spoiled toddlers. The duel ends in a draw. A monk declares it a sign from God. Both men are given command of separate squadrons that promptly do nothing for the next 5 days. Meanwhile, in the actual army, things fall apart. Wounds fester, food spoils, morale hits rock bottom and starts digging. Dieter is ordered to help bury a body with no known name, no surviving friends, and a sword made from repurposed scythe blades. He carves the plank himself, soldier, probably. That night a feast is held in the nobles' pavilion to celebrate a unified command. The meat is roast duck, the wine is warm, a minstrel sings about Emperor Friedrich's glory. Outside, Lucas is trying to boil water using a dented helm and horse dung. He calls it noble broth. At least 2 soldiers try to sneak into the feast. They're caught, whipped, and publicly humiliated. Their offense: dishonoring the campaign's dignity. Dignity apparently wears velvet and drinks from goblets while stepping over corpses. The next morning, a rumor spreads. Duke Albrecht of Hohenfels will arrive for inspection. Panic follows. Tents are cleaned, roads swept, uniforms patched. Dead horses are dragged out of view. For 3 days, the camp looks less like a military encampment and more like a theatre production. Dirt shoved under snow, shields polished, guards instructed to look lively. Duke Albrecht arrives with a procession of 20 mounted guards, 5 banners, and a man who holds his cape off the ground so it doesn't get dusty. He tours the camp, asks no questions, nods at everyone, and leaves by mid-afternoon. No one is allowed to speak to him. Lucas makes a list of things the Duke did. Walked 5 paces, ate from a gold bowl, complained about wind. This is war in the Empire. Show first, results later, if ever. Then come the inspections. Every squad is told to line up for presentation. Helmets straight, swords visible. Dieter stands in line for 2 hours while a count walks by, glancing over each man like they're livestock at market. He stops at one soldier, sneers and says, "Is that blood on your tunic?" The soldier replies, "Yes, my lord, mine." The count grimaces. "See to it that it's removed. We are not animals." Later that week, a nobleman falls from his horse while trying to dismount and sprains his wrist. He is attended to by 2 surgeons, 3 priests and a scribe. The injury is recorded in the campaign's official chronicle under the heading, "Wounds sustained in defense of the Empire." That same day, Lucas is cut by a bandit blade during a surprise raid. He bandages it himself using moss, dirt and half a page from a discarded sermon. No one records it, no one cares. Another noble, Lord Richter, orders his banner to be washed every morning. 2 soldiers are reassigned from scouting duty to carry buckets just for this task. When asked why, he responds, "The eagle must not fade. It is the symbol of order." The eagle flaps limply in the cold wind above a camp of half-starved men who haven't bathed since Pentecost. And then finally a battle, or something close to one. A rebel force, mostly peasants with stolen weapons, emerges from the woods. Ambush, chaos, screaming. Dieter sees Lucas go down, then get up again, blood on his cheek. He grabs a spear and hurls it, hits a man in the hip. The fighting is clumsy, desperate. Mud and curses. It lasts less than 20 minutes. When it ends, 14 soldiers are dead, 23 wounded, and the nobleman, still untouched. Their strategy, stay at the rear, shout orders, then emerge afterward to deliver speeches. Lord Richter rides into the aftermath and declares, "A great triumph, we held the line." He never saw the line. A scribe records it as the Battle of Black Hollow. Lucas calls it the confusion in the muck. Dieter just adds another scratch to his scabbard. That night around the fire, Lucas says, "You know what nobles do best? Command." Dieter offers, "No, survive. They don't fight, they don't suffer, they just survive everything." He's not wrong, because in this army, the only thing more armored than a noble's chest is his reputation. Dieter pulls his blanket tighter, staring into the fire. He thinks of every man who died with no name, no marker, no song, of every baron who rode past them, and he whispers, "They don't die in war, they just ride through it." Chapter 9, Heretics, Witches, and Just Wars. Somewhere between the burning of a barn and the hanging of a man for owning too many books, Dieter begins to understand. War in the Holy Roman Empire isn't about fighting enemies. It's about finding reasons. You can only march men through frost and famine for so long before they need a target that doesn't wear armor. And when there isn't one, the Empire makes do with a convenient villain. Heretics, witches, and anyone whose face doesn't look properly contrite at morning mass. After the rebel ambush, morale is shattered. 2 officers are dead, 5 men deserted, and 1 nobleman lost a feather from his hat. A loss he mourns with more passion than the entire infantry combined. In response, a priest declares that corruption of spirit has infected the ranks. The solution? A spiritual purge. That evening, Dieter and Lucas are summoned to a mandatory sermon, not in a chapel. There are none left, but in a muddy clearing, lit by torchlight. The priest paces before them, flanked by 2 scribes, and a man holding a crate of holy water. He begins calmly enough. Scripture, obedience, duty. Then the voice rises. Words sharpen. There are whispers in the camp, he cries. Doubt, rebellion, witchcraft. These sins rot faster than wounds. Lucas nudges Dieter and mutters, "He forgot lice." The priest continues. Tales of devils in the woods, of soldiers waking with bite marks, of a dream someone had where a woman in white cursed his soul. This is enough, apparently, to launch a full investigation. The next morning, 2 men are arrested, one for hiding an amulet, the other for praying in a foreign tongue. Neither are given a trial. The amulet turns out to be a carved wooden fish, and the foreign prayer was Slovene. Still, they're beaten, tied to stakes, and forced to confess. Confess to what? Doesn't matter, the crowd needs it. Dieter watches in numb silence, as one man recites lines fed to him between strikes. "I danced with spirits, I spoke to the moon." The second man tries to explain he was quoting a song. The priest slaps him and says, The devil quotes scripture too. They're sentenced to penance, not death, not yet. Instead, they're paraded through the camp in chains covered in ash, and forced to carry crosses made from broken spear shafts. This is the Empire's idea of spiritual realignment. Lucas doesn't speak the rest of the day. That night, a third man is found dead, face down in a puddle. No wounds, just a note pinned to his back. Witch blood. No one claims to know who did it. Everyone knows who did it. And so the hunt begins in earnest. Soldiers are told to report unholy behavior. That includes strange dreams, mumbling, unclean hands, or anything resembling a non-standard prayer. One man is accused because he carved a smiley face into his helmet, another because he sleeps with his boots on, a third is suspected of heresy after refusing communion wine. He just didn't like the taste. By the end of the week, 6 are arrested, 3 whipped, 2 vanish. 1, an old cook named Elsa, is publicly condemned for influencing the weather, her crime being outside when it started snowing. The priest who leads the Inquisition grows more theatrical with each case. His sermons become performances, his punishments rituals. He claims the army is a crusading body, now infected by rot. He calls himself a cleansing flame. Dieter calls him a lunatic with access to rope. Then comes the story of the woman in white. No one knows who started it. Maybe a scout, maybe a drunk, but soon everyone's heard it. A pale woman spotted near the edge of the forest, whispering curses. She disappears when followed. Some claim she has red eyes. Others say her feet don't touch the ground. One soldier claims she asked him his name, and he forgot it for a week. The priest seizes on the story immediately. The enemy has taken form, he declares. She is the cause of our sickness, our failure, our doubt. Orders are given, watches are doubled, patrols sent to cleanse the woods. Torches are handed out like ration. No one finds her, of course, but that doesn't matter. The idea of her becomes the new enemy. She is everything the army cannot name. The hunger, the fear, the shame of defeat, the pointlessness, all wrapped up in a ghostly silhouette. Dieter watches grown men swear they've seen her. One breaks down sobbing, another carves crosses into his palms. Lucas sits by the fire, sharpening his knife, eyes hollow. You think ghosts wear coats, he asks, or do they freeze like we do? The purges escalate. Now, it's not just outsiders, it's within. A man says the wrong thing in the latrines. Accused. Another hums a pagan tune at least. That's what someone claims. Arrested. Dieter is nearly accused himself after refusing to kneel fast enough during prayer. Only Lucas's sharp tongue distracts the accuser. You want a heretic? Try the quartermaster, Lucas says. Anyone who gives us this soup must be in league with Satan. They both spend the night under watch. But even purges grow old. After 2 weeks, the accusations slow. The fear burns out. The woman in white is never seen again. The priest moves on. His fire dimmed, his sermons shorter. The soldiers stop listening. They've learned a new truth. When you run out of enemies, you turn on each other. And when that gets tiring, you simply keep marching. There's a phrase Dieter hears from a grizzled veteran. Witch hunts make for great distraction, but poor progress. He remembers it, adds it to his list. The march continues. The heretics are gone, the witches but the wounds remain. Wounds from rope, blade and belief. Chapter 9. Heretics, Witches, and Just Wars. Somewhere between the burning of a barn and the hanging of a man for owning too many books, Dieter begins to understand. War in the Holy Roman Empire isn't about fighting enemies. It's about finding reasons. You can only march men through frost and famine for so long before they need a target that doesn't wear armor. And when there isn't one, the Empire makes do with a convenient villain. Heretics, witches, and anyone whose face doesn't look properly contrite at morning mass. After the rebel ambush, morale is shattered. 2 officers are dead, 5 men deserted, and 1 nobleman lost a feather from his hat. A loss he mourns with more passion than the entire infantry combined. In response, a priest declares that corruption of spirit has infected the ranks. The solution? A spiritual purge. That evening, Dieter and Lucas are summoned to a mandatory sermon. Not in a chapel, there are none left, but in a muddy clearing, lit by torchlight. The priest paces before them, flanked by 2 scribes, and a man holding a crate of holy water. He begins calmly enough. Scripture, obedience, duty. Then the voice rises. Words sharpen. There are whispers in the camp, he cries. Doubt, rebellion, witchcraft. These sins rot faster than wounds. Lucas nudges Dieter and mutters. He forgot lice. The priest continues. Tales of devils in the woods. of soldiers waking with bite marks, of a dream someone had where a woman in white cursed his soul. This is enough apparently to launch a full investigation. The next morning, 2 men are arrested, one for hiding an amulet, the other for praying in a foreign tongue. Neither are given a trial. The amulet turns out to be a carved wooden fish, and the foreign prayer was Slovene. Still, they're beaten, tied to stakes, and forced to confess. Confess to what? Doesn't matter, the crowd needs it. Dieter watches in numb silence, as one man recites lines fed to him between strikes. I danced with spirits, I spoke to the moon. The second man tries to explain he was quoting a psalm. The priest slaps him and says, the devil quotes scripture too. They're sentenced to penance, not death, not yet. Instead, they're paraded through the camp in chains covered in ash, and forced to carry crosses made from broken spear shafts. This is the Empire's idea of spiritual realignment. Lucas doesn't speak the rest of the day. That night, a third man is found dead, face down in a puddle. No wounds, just a note pinned to his back. Witch blood. No one claims to know who did it. Everyone knows who did it. And so the hunt begins in earnest. Soldiers are told to report unholy behavior. That includes strange dreams, mumbling, unclean hands, or anything resembling a non-standard prayer. One man is accused because he carved a smiley face into his helmet, another because he sleeps with his boots on, a third is suspected of heresy after refusing communion wine. He just didn't like the taste. By the end of the week, 6 are arrested, 3 whipped, 2 vanish. 1, an old cook named Elsa, is publicly condemned for influencing the weather, her crime being outside when it started snowing. The priest who leads the Inquisition grows more theatrical with each case. His sermons become performances, his punishments rituals. He claims the army is a crusading body, now infected by rot. He calls himself a cleansing flame. Dieter calls him a lunatic with access to rope. Then comes the story of the woman in white. No one knows who started it. Maybe a scout, maybe a drunk, but soon everyone's heard it. A pale woman spotted near the edge of the forest, whispering curses. She disappears when followed. Some claim she has red eyes. Others say her feet don't touch the ground. One soldier claims she asked him his name, and he forgot it for a week. The priest seizes on the story immediately. The enemy has taken form, he declares. She is the cause of our sickness, our failure, our doubt. Orders are given, watches are doubled, patrols sent to cleanse the woods. Torches are handed out like rations. No one finds her, of course, but that doesn't matter. The idea of her becomes the new enemy. She is everything the army cannot name. The hunger, the fear, the shame of defeat, the pointlessness, all wrapped up in a ghostly silhouette. Dieter watches grown men swear they've seen her. One breaks down sobbing, another carves crosses into his palms. Lucas sits by the fire, sharpening his knife, eyes hollow. You think ghosts wear coats? He asks. Or do they freeze like we do? The purges escalate. Now, it's not just outsiders, it's within. A man says the wrong thing in the latrines. Accused. Another hums a pagan tune at least. That's what someone claims. Arrested. Dieter is nearly accused himself after refusing to kneel fast enough during prayer. Only Lucas's sharp tongue distracts the accuser. You want a heretic? Try the quartermaster, Lucas says. Anyone who gives us this soup must be in league with Satan. They both spend the night under watch. But even purges grow old. After 2 weeks, the accusations slow. The fear burns out. The woman in white is never seen again. The priest moves on. His fire dimmed, his sermons shorter. The soldiers stop listening. They've learned a new truth. When you run out of enemies, you turn on each other. And when that gets tiring, you simply keep marching. There's a phrase Dieter hears from a grizzled veteran. Witch hunts make for great distraction, but poor progress. He remembers it, adds it to his list. The march continues. The heretics are gone, the witches but the wounds remain. Wounds from rope, blade and belief. The campaign is now officially a just war. The officers declare it in writing. The priests bellow it in sermons, and the nobles stitch it into banners, gold thread over red fabric, flapping high above the same old mud. A formal decree is read aloud one morning while soldiers line up shivering in the sleet. By imperial authority, this campaign now serves holy cause and righteous order. What that means exactly, no one explains. But everyone knows what changes. Punishments double, prayers become mandatory, looting is cleansing, and death is no longer death. It's divine taxation. Give your blood, and you might just buy a place in heaven. Maybe, if the bishop signs off on it. Dieter stands in that icy formation, listening to a priest shout over the wind, and wonders when marching from village to village destroying barns became sacred labor. He looks over at Lucas, who's wrapping his feet in a stolen tapestry and muttering, "Let me know when God starts handing out proper boots." It's not that faith itself has vanished, it's that it's become impossible to tell where it ends and theatre begins. The prayers come with choreography. The blessings are performed like stage shows. One monk now carries a bell that he rings every time a sword is drawn, as if announcing a holy duel. He was nearly killed during a skirmish when a soldier mistook him for an enemy and threw a shovel at his head. No one apologizes. The targets shift again. New orders arrive declaring the village of Burkhardstetten to be a known haven of dissent. When the army arrives, they find children hiding under carts and women clutching rosaries. No one resists. A single man, blind, elderly, asks a question. What law have we broken? He is whipped for challenging imperial judgment. His house is burned. The barn follows. One officer is heard saying, "It's better they have nothing, lest to tempt the devil." That evening, the soldiers feast on dried oats next to a smoking ruin. Lucas, staring into the flames, says, "How long before we're the heretics?" Dieter replies, "Depends on how hungry the next army is." This isn't justice, it's recycling violence through incense. A priest begins leading processions before every march, swings a censer, chants verses, sprinkles water on helmets. He calls it armor for the soul. Most soldiers call it a waste of time. One man is caught scoffing and sentenced to lashings. He now chants louder than anyone. The nobles are elated. Just wars are good for reputation. They write letters to their cousins bragging about their crusading deeds. One even has an artist sketch a portrait of him standing beside a burned shrine. The artist is paid with a cured ham stolen from the same village. Another noble orders custom embroidery for his banner. Dominus Vult, God wills it. Dieter reads it backwards and thinks it says God watches, but doesn't care. Then comes the trial. A boy, maybe 15, is accused of hiding rebels. He's dragged into camp shaking, clothes torn. He insists he was just delivering bread. He's not armed, he's not marked, he's terrified. Still, a tribunal is held. 3 priests, 1 noble, no defense. The trial lasts 8 minutes. The boy is declared guilty of aiding enemies of the divine cause. He is sentenced to be hanged. The rope breaks during the first attempt. Lucas whispers. Even the tree disagrees. The second rope holds. No one says his name afterward. No one records it. The noble who ordered the sentence receives a blessing. Later that week, an old woman is accused of weather manipulation. Again, this time she's a healer, carried a pouch of herbs and mumbled to herself in a dialect no one liked. She's stoned to death outside camp. Her body is burnt. The pile of herbs, confiscated, examined and then brewed into tea for the officers. "You can't make this up," Lucas says, sipping his own muddy water. One soldier, young, too curious, asks the chaplain how any of this counts as a just war. "Didn't Jesus say to love our neighbors?" he asks. The chaplain smiles. "Unless they're traitors, then we love their repentance by force." That soldier is reassigned. The next day he falls into a ditch and breaks his leg. Just wars, it seems, need fewer questions and more spectacle. There's a story spreading now, one told by a pilgrim who wandered into camp, offering relics. He speaks of a city far east where a statue of the Virgin cries blood every full moon. The soldiers laugh, joke about visiting. The officers listen seriously. The priests whisper about prophecies. The Empire is always looking for new miracles to exploit. Dieter listens, bored. He's seen too much real blood to be impressed by marble tears. Then comes a letter. It's read aloud. Pope Gregory himself has endorsed the campaign's mission. The soldiers cheer not for God, but because it means higher pay. The endorsement comes with funding. They receive salted meat for the first time in months. The Empire has spoken. This is a holy call. Dieter eats the meat and thinks about the boy they hanged. Lucas eats and says nothing. Later that night, someone pins a message to the prayer tree near camp. It reads, "If this is what holiness looks like, I'd rather be cursed." No one claims it, but everyone reads it. Chapter 10. Healing with leeches and fire. The sword doesn't scare Dieter anymore, nor does the arrow, or even the pike. It's what comes after that haunts him now, because in the Holy Roman Empire's army, a wound is not just a wound, it's an invitation to medieval medicine, and nothing good ever arrives by invitation. It begins with a cough, a shallow one at first. Lucas waves it off, says it's the dust or the smoke from too many burnt chapels, but by the next morning, he's hacking like a dying mule and spitting flecks of blood into the mud. Dieter tries to take him to the camp physician. Mistake. The physician is a man named Brother Ernst. who wears a robe stained with things Dieter doesn't want to identify, and speaks with the grave certainty of someone who's read half a book and memorized the wrong parts. His assistant, Jakob, carries a sack of leeches and a small saw. Neither of them smile. Brother Ernst listens to Lucas's chest with a brass funnel, squints and nods. Your humors are in rebellion. Is that worse than heresy? Lucas mutters. The prescribed treatment, bloodletting, and not just a few drops, a full pint at least. The illness gathers in the blood, Ernst explains, especially in the left elbow. He proceeds to slice open Lucas's arm with a dull blade and collect the blood in a wooden bowl used previously for boiling onions. Lucas passes out halfway through. Ernst calls this a sign of recovery. That night, Lucas sleeps beside the fire, pale as ash. Dieter feeds him bits of bread soaked in broth and wonders how draining blood is supposed to fix coughing. The next morning, the cough is worse. But Lucas is lucky, others aren't. In the tent beside them, a young soldier named Otto suffers a spear wound to the thigh. The bleeding stops but fever sets in. Brother Ernst diagnoses hot bile trapped in the flesh. Treatment, cupping therapy. They heat glass jars over a flame and place them on Otto's leg. The skin blisters. Otto screams. They assure him it's working. He dies 3 days later. Another soldier, struck in the shoulder, is told he must have angered a saint. The wound festers. Jakob rubs crushed garlic into it. When that fails, he burns it shut with a hot iron, whispering scripture. The smell of seared skin lingers for days. The truth is, most injuries aren't treated. They're managed, hidden, or made worse. A gash becomes rot. A bruise becomes a fever. A toothache becomes a death sentence. And everywhere there are flies. Infection is expected. Pus is normal. Screaming is the background noise of the medical tent. Dieter walks past it each morning and hears sounds that will never leave him. Saws against bone, begging prayers, wet choking. The leeches, meanwhile, are always busy. Brother Ernst claims they balance the divine forces of the body. He places them behind ears, on wrists, even under tongues. One soldier loses consciousness during the process. Ernst nods proudly. A deep cleansing. Dieter avoids the tent whenever possible, but he can't avoid the consequences. After a skirmish with a rebel patrol, a blade catches his thigh. It's shallow but deep enough to worry. Blood soaks through his leggings. He hides it for a day, then by the third, Lucas catches him limping. You're bleeding, Lucas says. I've been worse. Worse ends up in Ernst's Book of Martyrs. Eventually the pain forces Dieter to submit. He sits in the medical tent as Jakob peels back the cloth. Ernst inspects the wound, pokes it with a twig and proclaims, "You've caught corruption, possibly spiritual, possibly pagan." Dieter replies, "It was a knife." Treatment begins. First, they wash it with wine, cheap, sour, barely fermented. Then they pack it with wool dipped in honey and ash. Then they wrap it in linen and whisper a prayer to Saint Apollonia, patroness of dentistry. Dieter asks why. Ernst replies, "All saints assist if asked nicely." Then comes the real fun. Purge. They give him a concoction brewed from boiled herbs, charcoal and something that smells like old fish. It will draw out the sin, they claim. It draws out something. Dieter spends the night vomiting into a bucket made from a repurposed helmet. The wound closes, eventually. Not from treatment, just time. Ernst takes credit anyway. But others aren't as fortunate. In 1 week, Dieter sees a man lose his foot after maggots are accidentally encouraged. A woman healer arrested for curing soldiers too quickly, which aroused suspicion. A soldier trepanned his skull drilled open to release demons after complaining of headaches. The line between healing and harm is paper thin. Lucas recovers from the bloodletting, barely. He still coughs, but now with resignation. "I think they drained my will to live," he jokes. "Should have just let the demons win." Dieter nods. At least they wouldn't need garlic. There is one bright spot, brief and strange. A foreign surgeon arrives, from Naples maybe, speaks broken German, carries clean tools and smells like rosemary. He treats 6 men with boiled cloth, stitched sutures and vinegar. They live. One walks without a limp. Ernst watches with suspicion. "He's cheating," he whispers. The surgeon leaves after a week. Rumor says he was paid by a noble, or threatened by a priest. And then it's back to Ernst. Back to fire, leeches and prayers. The Empire's view on medicine is simple. Pain is proof. The worse it feels, the more it must be working. If the patient screams, the treatment is divine. Dieter adds a new mark to his scabbard. Day 63 saw a man cured by bleeding, only to die from thirst. There are no real cures here. Only choices: suffer now or suffer longer, heal by accident or die by appointment. Chapter 11. Peace isn't for people like you. The end doesn't come with fanfare. No bugles, no banners, no sudden cheers. It comes the way most things do in the Holy Roman Empire, with confusion, a cold drizzle, and a rumour muttered over cold bread. The war, this one, anyway, is over. The words spread like spilled ale. Someone claims a treaty was signed. Another says a bishop blessed both sides and declared them spiritually reconciled. A third insists the Pope himself grew tired of the noise and commanded everyone to go home or go to hell. None of it matters to Dieter, because whatever peace means, it doesn't look like anything has changed. The same mud, same coughs, same hunger. Only now, no one's yelling at them to charge into bushes or burn villages. The soldiers don't celebrate, they wait, suspicious, like dogs watching a butcher reach for the cleaver with a smile. Then come the orders, disbandment. Their unit is no longer required. The nobles leave first, naturally. Packed wagons, fresh horses, and clerks writing their glorious memoirs before the ink on peace is dry. The priests vanish next, leaving behind empty tents and half-burned candles. Even Brother Ernst slips away, citing a higher appointment and taking all the bandages with him. The foot soldiers, told to scatter. No payment, no provisions, no horses, just a verbal blessing from a man with clean boots. Thank you for your service. The Empire endures. Dieter stands in the camp's center, watching tents collapse one by one. Fires die, footprints vanish under frost. He thinks of Lucas, who deserved to see this, to see how little any of ever mattered. Some men start walking home, if they remember where home is. Others wander, drink, steal what's left. There's no patrol now, no rules. Only instincts worn thin from too many winters and too few reasons. Dieter doesn't know where to go. He tries heading west, toward where the sun sets, hoping maybe that direction will feel like escape. He walks for days, sleeps under trees, eats roots, and dry grain bartered from terrified villagers. His leg throbs, his ribs still ache from sleeping on stone. He finds work once. A blacksmith in a hamlet offers bread in exchange for hauling coal. Dieter agrees. After 2 days, the man's daughter finds his old scabbard. "Were you a soldier?" she asks. He nods. They ask him to leave. They say it politely with guilt in their eyes. But the message is clear. Soldiers bring trouble, plague, bad omens. No one wants peace with ghosts in armor. Dieter walks again. Every village is the same. Suspicion, distance, fear. He shaves his beard to look less like a deserter. It doesn't help. People can smell war on a man. He meets others like him. A man with a missing ear, begging near a monastery gate. A woman archer whose fingers shake too much to draw anymore. A boy no older than 15, carrying a stolen helmet like it's proof he mattered. They don't speak much, but they nod, like birds from the same ruined nest. The worst part isn't hunger, it's the silence. No order, no noise, no purpose, just memories. Dieter wakes from dreams of campfires, and wakes to cold soil. He misses Lucas's sarcasm, misses even the sermons, misses belonging, in the strangest way. Then come the recruiters. Peace, it turns out, is a technical term. Somewhere else, another border is under question. A prince insulted a bishop, a tax went unpaid, so the empire needs men again. Temporary deployment, they call it. Securing interests, maintaining divine order. Same lies, new clothes. Dieter is offered silver, he refuses. The recruiter laughs. You'll be back, you all come back, you've nowhere else to go. He's not wrong. Dieter tries staying in a town, builds a shelter from old boards, helps a miller for food, but he sees his own reflection in a window and starts. The man staring back is ragged, lined, ghost-eyed. Is this what peace made of him? The real betrayal is how quickly everything he suffered is forgotten. Villages rebuilt, fields regrown, nobles celebrated, priests speak of holy triumphs. No one speaks of the frozen marches, the shallow graves, the witch hunts, the amputations. Dieter watches a child play with a wooden sword and wonders if anyone will stop him. No one does. One evening, he visits a shrine. He doesn't pray, just stands. Someone's carved names into the stone. None of them are Lucas. None of them are his. He adds a mark anyway, a single line, then walks on. That night, he dreams of marching again. Mud, cold, Lucas humming that same cursed tune. He wakes alone and realizes something off. The war never really ended. It just changed its name. It's strange how war felt more predictable than peace. Dieter once knew what to do when he heard a trumpet, when he saw a banner rise, when mud soaked his boots. But now, every day is an improvisation, every meal a gamble, every face a question. He wakes in a stable, curled between hay and shadow, and stares at the rafters like they might offer advice. They don't. Wood just creep. Since the army dissolved, Dieter's life has shrunk into a rotating cycle of small, brutal routines. Search for food, avoid towns too proud for beggars, rest under roofs that don't ask questions, and most of all, never look too much like what he is, a former soldier without a cause. There's no glory in that, no pension, no ceremony. He tries working in a vineyard, pretending to be a mute. They let him stay a week. When they find the scars on his leg and arm, they mutter words like mercenary and bandit. He's gone by morning. Villagers whisper about peace, but it's peace built on denial. They pretend there were no raids, no mass graves, no towns burned to the foundation, no boys left behind in ditches. Only the priests still mention the war, but always in metaphors, poetic and vague. Dieter hears a sermon once, while hiding behind a chapel's cracked wall. The war has ended, the priest says, but its trials made us stronger. Dieter spits blood into the grass and wonders, stronger than what? He finds himself returning to the edge of forests. Always forests. Something about their silence matches his own, and they don't ask for stories, or papers, or coin. One morning, he meets a hunter, old, missing an eye, smells like bark and salt. They don't exchange names. The man offers Dieter half a roasted rabbit and says, "You've got the stare." What stare? The one where the body's here but the war still owns the bones. They share meals for 2 days. Then the man is gone, just like Lucas. There's a cruelty in peace few ever speak of. It leaves no witnesses. War might chew you, scar you, hollow you, but at least it remembers your name. Peace forgets, quickly, efficiently, almost politely. Dieter hears that the noble he once marched under, Count Rudolph, is now being awarded a cathedral for safeguarding the western province. The same province where his orders turned 3 villages into ash and screaming. A plaque will carry his name. Dieter can't remember the last time anyone said his out loud. He sees a boy in town once, wearing a repurposed breastplate, like a toy, pretending to fight invisible rebels. His mother smiles and says, "One day you'll be a hero." Dieter nearly shouts, nearly walks over, nearly says, "No, you won't. You'll be mud-soaked and forgotten, coughing into straw while your friends disappear in the dark." But he doesn't, because even bitterness takes effort now. He visits Marta's old camp on a whim, finds it abandoned, the herbs long withered. A scrap of cloth hangs from a post, one of Lucas's bandages. He pockets it, not knowing why. The nights stretch longer. Winter begins to whisper through the trees. Dieter barters a story for a blanket once. A tale about a haunted priest, and a miracle that was really just fever dreams. The innkeeper laughs, gives him half a crust. "You tell it like you were there," she says. "I was," he replies. She doesn't laugh again. He tries to write once, carves a short message into bark. "We were there." It looks small, petty. The bark flakes. The words vanish. Eventually Dieter drifts to a border town. They say a new army is forming there. Fresh recruits, clean armor, banners untouched by soot. The recruiters don't approach him this time. He's too gaunt, too grey. They want eager faces, not echoes of regret. But still he watches. The new soldiers train under a captain who reads Latin and shouts in perfect cadence. They march in straight lines. They chant about glory. Dieter knows the rhythm, even if the tune is new. He mouths along. Blood and bread for emperor and head. The world keeps marching, whether you're in step or not. One afternoon, he meets a boy near the river. The same boy who wore the breastplate, now older, with real armor, polishing his blade. "Were you a soldier?" the boy asks. Dieter nods. "Was it like the songs?" "No," Dieter says. "It was worse." The boy laughs nervously. "Did you win?" Dieter thinks about the fire, the hunger, the burning chapel. "Lucas." "No," he answers, "but I survived." The boy doesn't understand, but he nods anyway. That night, Dieter sleeps beside the river. The stars are dim. His breath curls in mist. He dreams of marching again, but this time alone. No banners, no commands, just footsteps, steady, forward, into fog that never ends. Chapter 12. The Empire forgets its footsteps. There's no statue for Dieter, no parchment, no song, no scribbled name on a war ledger that anyone will read twice. The only thing that might remember him is the worn leather on his scabbard and the limp in his stride, and even those are fading. Years have passed. How many? He doesn't count them. Not because he's forgotten. He simply doesn't want to mark the time since his last command, his last shared meal, his last companion. Because marking time implies progress, and Dieter has made none. He lives now on the edge of what used to be a village, and is now a pile of stones and gossip. No one knows who burned it. The Empire claims it was an unfortunate border skirmish. The neighbouring duchy blames foreign agitators. The old shepherds say it was soldiers, imperial ones, chasing a ghost that never existed. Dieter doesn't argue. He just tends the goats. Goats don't care who won. Each day begins with silence, broken only by bells on wool-covered neck. No orders, no sermons, no leeches. His body still aches. The cold makes his joints protest, like squeaky hinges. His cough hasn't left. It's quieter, like a dog growling in sleep. But it's always there. People pass through sometimes. Pilgrims, traders, one group of young students, travelling to chart historical battlefields. They carry scrolls and maps and ideas far too clean. Dieter overhears one say, "This region is where the 6th Company of the Imperial Banner made its heroic last stand." He smiles bitterly. He was in that company. There was no heroic last stand, just chaos, mud, screaming. A noble retreating first and dying second. The company scattered like rats from fire. He almost tells them, that they don't want the truth. They want a quote to put beneath an engraving. He spends evenings near the ruins of a burned chapel, one of many. It's quiet now, just ivy curling over cracked stone. He sometimes thinks he hears Lucas's cough carried in the wind, but it's always just wind. He tried carving a memorial once, a simple cross on a tree trunk with initials, L.E. Rain washed it away within a season. There's a market now in the nearest town, small, but bustling. Dieter visits once a month to trade goat cheese for salt and soap. The people there have new problems: bandits, taxes, and a priest who claims thunder is a sign of moral decay. No one talks about the wars anymore, except one man, a drunk, red-faced loud, claims to have served under General Balthus the Black, tells stories of triumph, of fire and steel, of maidens rescued and traitors punished. Dieter listens once, then interrupts. Balthus starved in a frozen field after marching in the wrong direction for 6 days. The tavern goes quiet. The drunk blink. And who are you to say that? Someone who buried him. They don't ask Dieter for stories again. He finds a journal one day, discarded in a basket outside a chapel, pages filled with prayers and notes from a travelling monk. One line catches his eye: "Even a silent saint leaves footsteps." He wonders if soldiers do too, or if their footsteps are wiped clean the moment peace arrives. Like boot tracks in a puddle, like names scribbled in snow. One morning, a letter arrives in the village, carried by a dusty messenger with a limp worse than Dieter's. It's from the Empire, or what's left of it, a formal declaration. In recognition of faithful service, all surviving veterans of the northern campaigns are granted amnesty and symbolic pardon. Pardon for what? Dieter doesn't know. He never committed crimes, just obeyed them. The letter says nothing about land, or payment, or apologies, just words, printed and sealed, meant to ease conscience, not consequences. He hangs it on a nail above his door anyway, as a joke, or a warning. Once, during a thunderstorm, he finds himself weeping, not from pain, but from memory. The noise, the flashing sky, it takes him back to a night when fire rained from hilltops and Lucas sang half a hymn before coughing blood into the mud. He whispers the rest of the hymn now, alone. The war is over. The Empire has moved on, but Dieter knows the war is never over for those who carried it home in their lungs. A travelling playwright stops by the village. He's collecting tales for a drama about the glorious Empire and its noble defenders. He asks Dieter for input. Dieter offers a line: "We weren't noble, we were tired, and we survived by accident." The playwright says that won't sell tickets. Dieter agrees. Autumn always comes too early in the hills. The air sharpens, the leaves surrender, and Dieter's joints remind him, without fail, that his body was once asked to carry too much for too long. Even the goats notice. Their bleats become more impatient, their eyes warier, as if they too remember what men in armour did to the world when it got cold. Dieter has settled, though he would never use that word. He's just stopped moving. There's no destination left to chase. The Empire has no use for him, and peace has no instructions. Still, he keeps routines. He chops wood, stacks it with care. He tends his goats, names them after saints no one prays to anymore. He sharpens his knife on quiet nights, not because he expects trouble, but because it reminds him he once had control over something. Even steel, sometimes he gets visitors. A merchant with a cart of cracked spices, a wandering monk who leaves behind a tin cup and a psalm. Once, shockingly, a boy from one of the new schools, a student of war history, all parchment and questions. "I'm writing about the great campaigns," the boy says, eyes wide. Did you serve? Dieter lies. No. The boy nods politely and keeps talking. He wants stories, victories, maps, famous names. Dieter offers none. The boy leaves disappointed, muttering something about how first-hand accounts are always the least romantic. That night, Dieter drinks old cider and laughs so hard he coughs for an hour. Romance, of war. He remembers holding Lucas's hand as the fever took him. He remembers watching Marta stitch a wound with shaking fingers, because the priest had called her healing unnatural. He remembers digging shallow graves with a bent helmet and praying that no one would find them. The Empire didn't write songs about that. Sometimes he wonders, had he died back then in mud or fire, would someone have bothered to enter noble ending? A tale of sacrifice, a ballad about holding the line. Maybe, probably. Men like him were always more useful dead than honest. One afternoon, while mending a fence, he finds something odd beneath the dirt, a coin. Imperial, worn smooth. Dieter rubs it clean with his sleeve. It bears the Emperor's face, sharp nose, thin crown, smug certainty, and a motto carved in Latin, Order in Glory. He pockets it, just to keep something ridiculous nearby. Later that week, a local lord passes through the area. Big hat, too many horses, a guard who looks like he's never seen mud. They're on a tour of the provinces. Dieter watches from a tree line. The guards joke about the countryside smelling of sheep dung and regret. The Lord blesses a field with a ceremonial ribbon. Someone points out the ruins of the old village nearby, burned long ago. The Lord squints. A reminder, he says, of what happens when the Empire is disrespected. No one corrects him. No one mentions the imperial banners that flew overhead when the flames began. Dieter spits in the grass. By now he knows, history is not a ledger. It's a poem edited by the winners and recited by their descendants. The bodies get buried, the truth gets massaged. The scars, those are personal. Winter comes. Dieter prepares quietly. He lays in wood, salt, oil, patches the roof, scratches a new set of lines into the doorframe, one for each year since the war ended. 12 mark. He adds a 13th, not because another year has passed, but because the ache in his chest says it will. There's a town celebration nearby, some saint's feast repurposed into a civic holiday. There are fireworks, banners, speeches about unity. Dieter doesn't go. He watches from a hilltop, sees colored sparks in the sky, hears distant cheering. They're celebrating a peace they didn't fight for in a world they didn't suffer to build. He doesn't blame them. That's what survival is, after all. Someone forgetting, someone moving on. Dieter lights a small fire of his own. He takes out a scrap of cloth, frayed, stained, folded tight, Lucas's old bandage. He throws it into the flame, not as a farewell, just to watch it rise. He remembers every face, every scream, every silent march through snow, but he knows none of them are written anywhere official. No monument, no chronicle, that's fine. He was never interested in monuments. He sharpens his knife again, not for war but for wood. He drinks his cider, he feeds his goats. One day he'll stop waking up, and that too will be peace. The only kind that asks nothing in return. The Empire will endure, that's what they always say, but no one will remember the footsteps that made it. If you ask me what sucked most about being a medieval soldier in the Holy Roman Empire, I'll tell you straight, it wasn't the battles. It wasn't the mud, the disease, or even the stench of death that clung to your skin like rot. No, the worst part was knowing you were disposable. You bled for nobles who couldn't remember your name. You fought wars with no purpose other than fattening some bishop's purse or settling a petty insult between cousins with crowns. And when the fighting stopped, they tossed you aside like spoiled bread. No pension, no land, just a handshake and a prayer that you'd rot quietly. You weren't even a man, you were a unit, a body with legs and a weapon. Your name was next, and here's the worst joke of all, they called it divine order. Yeah, divine if your god happens to enjoy watching people starve in ditches while priests sew your limbs back on with dirty thread and call it holy medicine. But you know what's tragic? The resources were there, not wealth, no soldier ever got that, but knowledge, skills, people. There were women like Marta who actually knew how to heal, but they were sidelined, mocked, even punished because they didn't wear robes or chant Latin. We had herbalists, midwives, tanners, even blacksmiths who could have fixed gear better than imperial suppliers ever did. But no, status mattered more than skill, and if you didn't have a noble name or a church seal, your knowledge was witchcraft. Idiots with rings ran the world while men with mud on their hands died for it. Now if I had been given the power, not glory, just practical power back then, I would have flipped the whole structure on its head, made frontline medics out of those midwives, given soldiers training in herb lore, turned peasants into logisticians, built rotating rest corps instead of grinding men into dust and wondering why they dropped dead mid-march. Even communication, something as simple as letting soldiers know why they were marching, could have changed everything, kept morale alive. But no, the Empire kept its plans locked in castles while the rest of us wandered through forests blindfolded, spears in hand, waiting to trip over another corpse. And food, don't even start on food. We passed through forests bursting with herbs, nuts, edible root, but we were too scared, too ignorant, or too ordered to touch them. Ate moldy grain and rat jerky instead. Imagine that, dying with a stomach full of poison while clean water and dandelions grew a mile away. What's the solution? Easy: respect. Not slogans, not prayers, actual ground-level respect for skill, for labor, for life. If the Empire had respected the people bleeding for it, even just a little, maybe history would have remembered their names. But it didn't, and that's why it sucked. Because in the Holy Roman Empire, survival wasn't heroism, it was just an accident. You've been listening to The Drowsy Historian. If this glimpse into forgotten footsteps moved you, don't forget to like, share,